Good afternoon, everyone. Go ahead and get started with the Waste Management Committee meeting. Now 4:30. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you for showing up, especially my CAB members and the support team. Any CAB members or participating individuals online, I'd like to thank you. If you'd like to go around the table and introduce yourselves, CAB members, please.
Marilyn Parson, CAB.
Harold Simon, CAB.
Cleveland Lattimore, CAB.
Rose Hayes, CAB. Judy Jones, CAB.
Earl Shepherd, CAB.
Louis Walters, CAB.
Thank you. We're being recorded, so I'd like to be courteous and upfront and straight to the point. So let's please not go out of order in any form or fashion. We'd like to keep the meeting on schedule. There's a public comment section that will come available shortly, so you will have your time to be heard. We ask that you sign up for your public comment roster, which is on the back table. Anyone wishing to address the CAB, we ask that you come forth and state your name and your affiliation so you can be heard, and make sure all the CAB members signed in. The Waste Management Committee, we have two open recommendations. Review the tank cleaning criteria, which is 311. 312, the liquid waste treatment maximization. We'll worry about whether we're going to close those later. I need to talk with my fellow CAB members. And 435 to 455, we will have a consultant technical evaluation report from H Tank Farm, Jim Schaffner, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. At 4:55 to 5 o'clock, we'll have a closure of H Tank Farm with Ms. Sherry Ross, DOE, SR. And 5 to 5:20, Liquid Waste System Plan Review number 19, Pete Hill, SRR. Again, that's how we're going to run this meeting, and we ask that you guys follow that accordingly, and we will begin. Jim? Yes, sir.
Do I do my own slides, or?
What's your preference? Would you prefer to?
I can just ask you to change them if you want to. Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Schaffner from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today, and I appreciate you getting us a nice, cool spring day to come down here. I would be remiss if I didn't also introduce my co-worker, Chris McKinney, who is the head of our performance assessment branch. Chris is actually the head of the group that does the heavy lifting on the technical evaluation report. I'm the PN. I'm supposed to make the trains run on time and give presentations and make sure documents get uploaded properly. So if you got any real detailed technical questions, I'm going to punt them over to Chris. Anyway, I am here to talk about the NRC technical evaluation report for H Area Tank Farm, pursuant to NDAA. Next slide, please. By way of background, just to remind you of something I'm sure you already know, the NRC's role in NDAA is twofold. The first one is consultation, which we're coming to the end of now. Originally, consultation was supposed to be on an individual tank or paired tank basis. Had we chosen to do it that way, the consultation would have probably gone well into the 2020s. We're now on an aggregate tank farm basis. As you know, a couple years ago, we completed a TER for F Tank Farm. and we're now in the monitoring phase for F tank farm. And currently, we're on track to soon complete the TER for H tank farm. And I say soon complete is sort of a failure. We should have had it done by now, but our process is what it is, and it's taken a little longer. Anyway, once we complete that, hopefully by the end of this month, we will be going into monitoring for H tank farm, and probably in combination with F tank farm, because there are an awful lot of similarities between the two tank farms, and so it kind of makes sense to combine the monitoring activities. And of course, in monitoring, we do that in coordination with the state of South Carolina, DHEC. Next slide, please. Just a little brief chronology of our consultation. DOE formally submitted the draft basis for the waste determination in February of 2013, along with the I think it was Rev 2 of the performance, or Rev 1 of the performance assessment, all 8,000 pages of it. And I'm only on page 7,800 right now, to tell you the truth. And that commenced our consultation with the DOE, which we recognized would culminate in a technical evaluation report that provided a series of recommendations to NRC or to DOE that could inform their decision on the waste determination. In July of 13, we did submit a series of I think probably 50 or so requests for additional information to DOE. Many of the RAIs were similar to RAIs for F tank farm. You know, as I said, there's quite a bit of commonality between the two tank farms, so there's similar concerns. DOE responded to the RAIs in November, but there were still some residual questions that we NRC sent back to DOE. So the process really of response actually ended in January of 14. Since then, we've been toiling to put together our technical evaluation report, and actually the technical folks had really completed their work by about the end of March of this year, and we've been chugging along in our internal approval process since then, and I've got my fingers crossed that it's going to be complete next week. But it's not something that I control, so that's why my fingers are crossed. Next slide, please. Oh, you got it. Okay. The TER addresses in great detail the three criteria that are specified in the NDAA. The first one is whether or not a repository disposal is required for the waste. The second is whether or not radionuclides, highly radionuclides, have been removed to the maximum extent practical. Now, this is interesting terminology. The law itself is retrospective. It says that they have been removed, but of course, we are doing this consultation kind of betting on the come, because obviously DOE has a long way to go as far as cleaning out the tanks and everything. So we're looking at their process, and I'll get into this in a minute. And looking more at the way by which they're going to go about it, because like I said, the law is written a little differently than what we're actually doing. And then finally, the third one is the ability to meet the performance objectives in 10 CFR 61. 10 CFR 61, I'll remind you, is NRC's rule for low-level waste management. It's something that's directly applicable to a site like Barnwell. But in there, it actually has a regulatory context. Using it in the NDAA context, the performance objectives, and using them as guidelines, but it doesn't really, they're not really regulations per se, because we don't regulate this aspect. Without going into, because a TER isn't finalized, findings and recommendations are very similar to those that were included in the F tank farm TER. Major differences I'll point out. In H-tank form, some of the tanks are at or below in some places completely submerged, and others are partially below the groundwater table. In F, some are close to the groundwater table, and I guess depending on changing conditions could be partially submerged at some point, but as of now, my understanding is they're not. The other thing is that particularly with tank 16 in H-tank form, there's been a significant amount of waste material that has gotten out of the primary tank containment and into the annuli, and so that's an aspect that NRC looked closely at. And finally, let's see, the recommendations that are in the TER will become, obviously something to inform DOE as they look at their waste determination, but also will become the basis for NRC monitoring as we move into that phase. And again, as I smile sometimes, you're way ahead of me. Okay. Criterion 1, and this one goes away relatively quickly. There's one full page of a 300-page TER devoted to Criterion 1. And again, it's whether or not geologic repository, geologic disposal is required. DOE in their draft basis posits that it's not required, and NRC agrees with that, that there's no unique safety or security considerations that would warrant geologic disposal. Criterion 2 is whether or not radionuclides have been removed to the maximum extent practical. And here again, we're looking at this prospectively, not retrospectively, as the law would suggest. We're looking at approach to identifying and quantifying highly radioactive radionuclides, both in their performance assessment, which of course is in a lot of cases they have to make some assumptions, and then as they move along, when they run into some things that they didn't anticipate, and how they handle that in their overall modeling approach. And we look at as they do the cleaning technologies, how the technologies are applied, whether or not the strategy for application is transparent. We look at techniques for sampling residuals and characterizing samples. And we did note in our review that DOE's approach to developing projected tank inventories is generally conservative. Their approach to developing final inventories is reasonable. We do suggest that they might need some improvement in quantifying uncertainty, and we go into a lot more detail on that in the TER. And we encourage DOE to continue to evaluate the efficiency of various tank cleaning technologies, and again, their process for identifying HRRs is NRC considers reasonable. Criterion 3 is the big boy, and takes up most of the analysis in the TER, and gets into a lot of detail and a lot of technical areas. It looks at the waste classification in accordance with the 10 CFR Part 61, whether or not the waste is Class C or greater than Class C. And it looks at the 4 performance objectives: protection of the general population from releases, and that's usually measured at an arbitrary boundary of 100 meters distant from the site boundary. We look at protection of the inadvertent intruder, someone who might be happening upon the waste without knowing it's there. We look at protection of workers and public during operations, and finally we look at the long-term stability of the site. And again, these are derived from the 10 CFR Part 61, the low-level waste rule. And again, these are, they don't have the force of regulation here, but they do provide a benchmark. And of course, the law requires us to notify Congress if at any time we feel that the DOE is in jeopardy of not meeting these performance objectives. Let's see. And here, again, without going into a lot of detail, we looked at looking at as DOE does in their performance assessment, look in great technical detail at the various parameters and factors that can cause waste to either be isolated or transferred to a point of concern. We look at cementatious material. Of course, with the tanks, that's both cementatious material that was introduced a long time ago when the tanks were built, the vaults, the base mat, but also cementatious material that will be introduced as a result of DOE's closing the tanks, the grout material that will eventually be introduced to the tanks. And the grout material, of course, it has characteristics that reducing capabilities that moisture coming in contact with it would tend to be in a reducing state, and therefore not likely to increase solubility. But that's something that can change with time, and so we look very closely at that. We look at the tanks themselves, the corrosion aspects of the tank, things that can, both water and chemical reactions associated with the surrounding cement and other things that can either enhance or detract corrosion of the tanks. We look at the waste characteristics themselves, how soluble the various radionuclides are, and whether or not those solubility characteristics are going to change with time, and what aspects of the system could change those solubility characteristics. And then that's, in what we terminology refer to as near field. And then once we establish that there is a release mechanism, that the water that is carrying radionuclides can move into the groundwater. Then we look at the characteristics of the groundwater itself. Its velocity and its chemical characteristics, and how it's going to affect the dispersivity and diffusion of the waste material as it moves along. And this intuitively, I think you look at the system like this and you say, well, it's you got these these solid tanks surrounded with concrete and all that, but they're very robust. But we're talking about very long time periods that we have to be concerned with. 10,000-year horizon, and one can posit that a lot of things can happen in 10,000 years, and that's why these both DOE's analysis in their performance assessment and our verification of that are understandably rigorous. And most of the factors that we look at are associated with the first performance objective, protection of the general public. But they're very similarly, some of the same considerations are used to look at the protection of the inadvertent intruder. The protection of the public, the workers during operations, and the public, that kind of speaks to itself. I mean, that looks at DOE's health physics program and their radiation protection program, and of course they do have a very rigorous radiation protection program. So that generally gets less of a look than some of these other things. And finally, we look at the stability of the site, and that's we're looking at not only things that are there now, like the characteristics of the tanks themselves, and the structure of the soil profile underneath. Like one of the areas that we've been concerned with there's some soft zones that had been identified under parts of the Savannah River site, and we posited that could have some impacts on stability. And also, as obviously this is a long way down the road, but eventually DOE is going to be building a very extensive soil cover, soil and other material cover over the entire tank farm. That will also have some impacts on both on the ability of water, meteoric water, to reach the tanks, and also it has some stability implications. So that's another area that we look at. Finally, just as I said, I was hoping that when I came here, I was going to be able to hand you all a big 300-page document that you could take home and read tonight. But for better or for worse, that's not going to occur. So we're not going to get into a lot of the detailed recommendations that will be part of that. But just a couple closing thoughts. Our review results and recommendations are based on extensive staff review of material provided by DOE, as well as clarifying discussions in person and by phone. I only touched on these in an earlier slide, but there were extensive interactions between the two agencies, very specific focused telephone exchanges on various technical topics that were oftentimes not done in a public venue, but they were always summarized. There was always a public summary of those discussions that can be found in our document management system, ADAMS. So there's extensive interactions between the two agencies, and DOE has been very cooperative in providing whatever documents we've asked for in our review. They've been very generous in providing those for us. And so it has been, we're getting to the end of a very, very rigorous and extensive deliberative process. NRC believes one of the reasons that we focus so much on criterion 2 in our consultation is the way the law is written. Criterion 2, in a lot of ways, kind of goes away once we move into monitoring space. So any issues that we have with the removal of the identification and removal of the highly radioactive radionuclides, we pretty much have to kind of establish those concerns and get answers to those questions in our consultation stage. That's why there's a lot in the document on that. As I mentioned earlier, the H-tank form TER will draw no specific conclusions regarding our DOE's ability to meet the performance objectives. Rather, we offer a number of recommendations that we hope will be beneficial in that regard. But because we're dealing with a very long process here, and of course, once we get into monitoring, we're going to be in that mode for the indefinite future. And so the relationship will go on, even though, as I said earlier, this is probably going to be the last consultation that we do. And with that, I think I just about used up my time, so I'm going to wrap it up and invite you if you've got any questions. Or not. Yes.
I have a question. Karen Patterson, Public. First, thank you very much. It's always refreshing to find an agency that actually completes what they start, so I appreciate that.
We haven't completed it yet.
But I can tell that you are close enough to where you will. I'm taken from this that your monitoring is for closed tanks only. So the fact that the schedule for cleaning the tanks and getting the tanks closed.
Well, I don't, Chris, if I get off, and it's not completely true. I mean, we look at this situation holistically when we're out there. I mean, we are, I mean, obviously that when DOE's in the process of closing tanks, that's a very strong emphasis. But the fact is that, as DOE closes tanks, they do special analysis that kind of, bring the whole process up to speed. But that also includes, information that it captures some of the tanks that haven't been closed yet.
Okay, well, that's what I was driving at, is I'm concerned that pushing the schedule out with these tanks sitting in the water table is not going to benefit the tanks. And so I'm wondering if you had some mechanism in your monitoring program to say something to DOE if you thought pushing the schedule out too far was going to cause trouble. It's whatever.
If we do, it's way above my pay grade.
All right, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of questions. You mentioned that there was a determination that no geologic repository was required. What's the criteria for that determination? And secondly, you mentioned that there's a difference between your process and the way the law is written.
Well, as I said, the law is written as though the determination with regard to highly radioactive radionuclides is in the past, that it's already occurred. And of course, that an example was in the case of similar tanks up in Idaho. Most of the tanks had been cleaned out before the consultation, and therefore, it was a true statement that that it was. We were looking back and it had been done. Here, we're still a long way from having cleaned out, or DOE's a long way from having cleaned out the tanks. So in our consultation, we have to look at their process rather than their result.
Confusing.
And
And the criteria for determining that.
okay, yeah, that's. I mean, the whole idea of WEIR is to sort of move some material that by definition is high-level radioactive waste, that by definition has to go to a geologic repository. The whole purpose of this exercise is to come up with a way that some of this material can be determined that it doesn't have to follow that route. And a lot of that determination is made by looking at criterion 2 and 3, but the law says, notwithstanding that, if there's some other unique circumstance, regardless of being able to meet all these other things, if there's some other unique circumstance, I'm trying to think of an example. Chris?
Yeah, Chris McKinney, NRC. One of the circumstances could be like heat loading, which would be if it had not radioactive, because it's radioactive rate, and while it would be short-lived and therefore could be isolated in the environment, wouldn't get out of the environment over the short term, would cause heat generation in the local area. That may be a characteristic that would say you still need to dispose of it in geologic repository because that's going to be designed for the heat creation, not just the radioactive nature. But in this case, what's remaining on the tanks and stuff doesn't create that heat load, so therefore that doesn't cause a concern. Another thing would be criticality potential or something like that would be such that you'd want to redesign it and move the waste into a new configuration in a repository. Those are some of those considerations that for criterion 1 could be beyond criterion 2 and 3 that may say that even though you could meet the protection of the environment over the long term, the protection of workers in the short term, you'd still want to move it to a geologic repository. And so in this case, we have found none of those criteria to be true, so that we're saying that you don't have those special characteristics in this waste that would make you take it to a geologic repository.
Specific to the tank in H-tank farm, how do you classify that waste then, the remaining?
We classify it as waste and snow reprocessing, which is
that
suitable.
High, medium, low? What is it?
It is waste that is suitable to be disposed of as low-level waste in the near surface. And because while its source basis is still that it was high-level waste, but because of its characteristics, it can be disposed of as if it were low-level waste.
So would it come under CERCLA or RCRA?
Well, that would be to DOE, but I think that both the tank farms are, to my understanding, DOEs, that the tank farms are closed under both with an evaluation with the state and also with EPA's circular program.
Yeah, we have to move on at this point. I know, Marilyn, you had something you wanted to say, but we're kind of pushing it, unless it's very, very.
Well, I think it might be real quick. In your closing thoughts, it says, your last bullet says, as with the F-tank farm, the NRC technical evaluation review for H-tank draws no specific conclusions regarding DOE's ability to meet the performance objectives. And those performance objectives are important because that's public protection. So who does determine that?
Well, it's an ongoing process. I mean, if we get into monitoring, you know, we'll constantly be looking at that. And if at some time we would see during our monitoring phase that we did believe that they were not going to meet those performance objectives, our obligation is to send a letter to Congress and tell them that. The law doesn't say where it goes from there. You know, I mean, as I said, we have no regulatory authority here. You know, in monitoring, we periodically review both reports that DOE does and also have on-site visits a couple times a year, and constantly looking at this. And if at any time we would determine that they're not going to meet the performance objectives for whatever reason, then our obligation is to so inform Congress. And then, you know, who knows what Congress does.
Thank you, Mr. Schaffner.
You bet.
Appreciate it. We have Ms. Sherry Ross. I'm sorry we ran a little bit behind, but I know she'll help me make up the difference.
Yeah, I don't have much to say, I'll be quick. Wanted to just tell you where we're going to go from here on closure of H-tank. And just briefly the status of our regulatory requirements. Where are we? What's our path forward and schedule? And then see if you have any questions. Next slide. Acronym. Sorry, I'm using them. We did consult with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the entire H-tank farm. So here's a picture of taking the entire H-tank farm, about 29 tanks and systems, diversion boxes, and evaporators. So that was the scope of the consultation process. Next slide. And if you look at the regulatory roadmap, which I presented on before, so I'm not going to go into detail, the check marks are those areas that are complete, and the 3 stars are what we're working on now. And I'll just tell you the next slide will tell you where we are. So we're going to consider NRC's technical evaluation report as we move forward to make decisions within the department to close the H-tank farm. We're working on a NEPA supplement analysis now. That decision level is the DOE site manager. We're expecting that decision in July of this year. In fact, I've been working that actively the last 2 weeks. Waste determination and the supporting basis document, we will revise that document considering NRC's consultative advice and publish that hopefully by September. That decision maker is the Secretary of Energy. The Tier 1 closure authorization is also going to be signed around the same time frame, around September. And that decision maker is the Assistant Manager for Environmental Management. And we will also provide responses to all the public comments we got on the draft basis document around September, and we will publish that in the Federal Register. And then we're going to post all that on our website so you can access it. Any questions? Oh, that'd be quick.
Very quick question because we're behind on time.
What is the NEPA analysis?
It's to verify. The NEPA was done back in 2002, so we're 10 years into it. We want to verify we're covered. We do have a new performance assessment with a new modeling. We'll check it. We'll be covered because the previous modeling was very simplistic, large.
Could the CAB get a copy of the H-tank farm closing regulatory map? Looks very helpful, but it's unreadable.
Yeah, we usually do provide a large copy. We get you one.
Thank you.
Can you tell us which, or tell me which ones are in the water table?
Yes. Can you go back to the map? Okay, 9 through 16, right here in the center of the site. These, right through here. So 9 through 12 are actually submerged in the water table, and 13 through 16 are the bottoms. We call the feeder wet, bottoms of the tanks in the water table. They knew that when they designed them. 12 and 16 are the first 2 to be closed, hopefully next year.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. Really appreciate it. And I have Pete Hill, SRS. I'm sorry.
Earl, Jim Polk, Daily, Acting Assistant Manager for Waste Extermination. And if Pete gets up here, he just asked me to throw a word or two out here of introduction and kind of prep work. And when I agreed to do that, I didn't realize I could probably say something like, you know, ripped from today's headlines. But I did see both the Aiken and Augusta paper had a little article on the system plan. So got it mostly right. Got a few little details I think Pete's going to be able to work out for us. And I guess what I asked for as we go through this process, recognize one thing, Rev 19. So as we go through system planning, it's an annual event that we take inputs, we take assumptions, we use a look ahead at what the future could be, okay? And I make a distinction between that and a forecast. If I look at a weather forecast, I do the same kind of crunching with data and spit it out there, but there's really not a whole lot I can do with forecast, okay? It is what it is. The plan is something now that we identify some issues, things we can collectively go work on and try to make some improvements. So with that, I'll offer up to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. Got it. I'm Pete Hill, Manager of System Planning for Savannah River Remediation. Today I'm going to give just a brief overview of the liquid waste system and the current status. And we'll talk about Rev 19 inputs and assumptions, a little bit on why we do system plans, and then we'll get into the specific results of Rev 19 and then have a little conclusion. Excuse me. When we talk about the liquid waste system, we're talking about the tanks in the tank farm that we just heard about. Currently, we have 43 tanks that contain waste, about 280 million curies. About 10% of the 37 million gallons of waste is something we call sludge. It's precipitated metal oxides and hydroxides, kind of think peanut butter in the bottom of the tank. We're able to send that to DWPF for vitrification. We've been doing that since March of 1996. The remaining 90% of the volume is salt waste, and that's about equal proportions of salt liquid, just a very salty of water, and the other portion is a salt cake, kind of like if you think of one of those livestock blocks of salt, very hard. The salt waste is currently being processed at ARP MCU. ARP MCU extracts well over 99% of the radionuclides. We send those to DWPF for incorporation in the glass with the sludge. And the bulk of the volume, well over 99% of inert chemicals, sodium, nitrite, nitrate, that kind of thing, are sent to saltstone where they're turned into grout. As Sherry mentioned, out of the 51 original tanks, 6 have already been closed. 2 of the tanks, 12 and 16, are essentially all the waste has been removed, and we're in the process of closure for those. Of the old style tanks, 70% of the original volume is already empty. Of the newer Type 3 tanks, about 14% is empty. And just the last thing here, as I mentioned, well over 99% of the radionuclides will end up in the glass for deposit in the federal repository. Much smaller fractions will be left in the tanks at closure, and an even smaller fraction goes to saltstone. When we're talking about the system plan, this is a useful concept to keep in mind. We call it the gear chart, but it shows how highly integrated liquid waste operations are. So when you're thinking, I want to close the tank, you have to realize that before you can close the tank, it has to be cleaned. Before you can clean it, either the sludge or salt has to be removed. In order to remove it, you have to have some place for it to go. So that means you're either operating salt processing right now, that's ARP MCU, SWPF in the future. The sludge stream, as I said, can go to DWPF. Since the salt is incorporated in the glass, the sludge, if you're running ARP MCU, you have to run DWPF. In order to run DWPF, you have to have a place to temporarily store the cans. So that's glass waste storage. And on the salt side, once you decontaminate the salt solution and turn it into grout, you need a final disposal location. That's the salt stone disposal unit there. And we have other
facilities that evaporators have to operate. We need salt processing to keep the evaporators healthy. So everything's integrated, and it's not really possible to turn up one knob without affecting the others. And as Jim mentioned, about every year we do a system plan, and there's a lot of reasons why we'll change the plan. You know, obviously we're on Rev 19, so things change. We have advances in technology. Between Rev 14 and 15 of the system plan, we introduced melter bubblers at DWPF, which doubled the capacity of the melter. So that was an advance in technology. Changes in sequencing between Rev 17 and 18. The SWPF startup date was changed from 2014 to 2018 in those assumptions. Acceleration opportunities between Rev 15 and 16, we had a combination of ARRA funding and a technology improvement with small column ion exchange. It became viable, and we incorporated both of those into the plan. It demonstrated that it would be possible at that time to cut 6 years off the projected life cycle from the previous Rev 15. And then funding adjustments between Rev 16 and 17, and now you'll see between Rev 18 and 19, a change in the expected funding profile is the ultimate driver in the outcome of the plan. So when we talk about inputs to the system plan, the only real significant change from Rev 18 was the funding profile that we're assuming. It's listed here, it's on your slide. You see 407 this year, and these are dollars direct to SRR, the liquid waste contractor. Then it goes up to 430 unescalated for FY 15 through 19. That includes a couple of things that are part of that 430, and then eventually to 525 starting in FY 20. But that also includes $80 million a year to operate SWPF. So at first, when you see those numbers, it looks like, hey, your funding is projected to be going up in the years to come. But the reality of it is, while 430 is more than 407, there are things that we need to do to the liquid waste system to prepare to support SWPF when it starts up. We have to tie it in, we have to build those salt stone disposal units. They're very expensive. We need to build additional canister storage, and the 430 itself is unescalated, so the impact of escalation also need to be considered. So what happens is that this gray area represents the funding that's left over to support the rest of liquid waste operations. Operate ARPMCU, take the waste out of the tanks, clean the tanks, close the tanks, do maintenance on all those facilities. That in the near term, it's not increasing, and it's actually on a gentle decline. And when you factor this funding profile in with all the other technical inputs and do the system plan modeling, we realized two significant outcomes that we weren't pleased with. The first is that when SWPF starts up, we won't be able to support it at its rated capacity, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then after grouting 5 and 6, in 12 and 16 here in the near term, we can't afford to grout any more tanks until 2024. So when you look at SWPF, the plant itself has the capability to run anywhere from 4.6 million gallons in the initial years up to 9 million gallons per year. But in order for SWPF to operate at that capacity, we need to be able to feed it that much salt feed. And just as importantly, we need to be able to take the effluent streams. DWPF will receive cesium laden stream, and then another stream that has strontium and actinides in it. And then the decontaminated salt solution goes to saltstone. So those facilities need to be able to accommodate those high levels of throughput from SWPF. And when we dig into the model results, we find out that we weren't able to support SWPF at the rated capacity for several reasons. In order to feed SWPF, you need one of our waste tanks emptied and available to prepare the batch recipes. We don't take the waste directly out of a tank and send it to SWPF. We actually will take waste out of 3 to 5 tanks and blend it, sample it, and make sure it meets the waste acceptance criteria for SWPF, and then send it. For every 3 million gallons you'd like to feed to SWPF per year, you need one of those tanks available. So when SWPF starts up, we're finding we don't have tank space created to prepare feed at the rated capacity, and that really limits SWPF for the first 3 years of operation. And when you dig into why that is the case, why don't we have space available, compared to Rev 18, we're not able to operate ARPMCU fast enough to create the tank space. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. Additionally, both DWPF and Saltstone need some modifications implemented to support the higher throughputs at SWPF, and due to the funding profile, we were not able to have those installed at SWPF startup. Back on the gear chart, if you remember that, there's 3 of those gears, I'll zip back here real quickly, that are more expensive than the others. Taking the sludge waste out of the tanks is very expensive. It requires very large mixing pumps, electricity to support the pumps, structural steel on top of the tanks. So bulk sludge removal is very expensive. Additional canister storage, you need a place to put the cans once they're poured, and additional salt disposal units. Those 3 gears are more expensive than the others. So when we looked at, well, why don't we just run DWPF a little faster, we really couldn't afford to get the sludge out in time, and with even a slight increase, then we started bumping up against the availability of additional canister storage. And so the net output here of Rev 19, when you total what SWPF should be capable of against what Rev 19 projects we'd be able to support it at, you'll see that we're about 18 million gallons behind, and at 9 million gallons a year, that means SWPF will have to run 2 years longer than it would if we were able to support it fully at startup. As I mentioned on the previous slide, with respect to tank closures, so 5 and 6 closed here in December, a couple of years ahead of schedule. Tanks 16 and 12 are the other 2 tanks of the 4 that are needed to meet the FY15 FFA commitment. Those will be closed in FY16. Tank 16 is very close to the FY15 date. But then given the Rev 19 inputs, that funding profile that we have available, we cannot afford to grout any more tanks until 2024. That next tank is projected to be tank 11. I mentioned ARPMCU processing is very important. It does several things for us. You need ARPMCU operations so that you can continue to prepare sludge for DWPF. You need ARPMCU operations to support any operations at H Canyon. It also makes space to do tank cleaning so that you can close them, and it empties out the space so that you're prepared to feed SWPF when it starts up. ARP is using the next generation solvent in Rev 19, so that'll reduce the number of curies that go to Saltstone at a higher, better removal efficiency for cesium, so more of the cesium goes into the glass. But when we look at the ARPMCU throughput, we see that it's limited in Rev 19 for several reasons. First, if you remember back in the September timeframe, SR had a significant workforce restructuring, about 600 employees. The staffing that's left in the tank farm and at Saltstone does not support higher levels of ARPMCU operation. The availability of STU6 would be the next limiter once we resolve the limited staffing. We have about 3 or 4 months of spare canister storage capacity at the planned rates, so we start bumping it up against canister storage. And then, as I mentioned, the ability to afford sludge retrievals to put in the cans along with the salt waste is limiting. And as with other plans, we plan on operating ARPMCU up until 6 months before SWPF. With respect to sludge processing, since the sludge removal is so expensive and there is a finite number of canister storage locations, our strategy is to limit canister production to only the number of cans required to support salt processing at ARPMCU. So in fact, in the gear chart, the salt processing rate is really the driving gear in that whole chain, and everything else is synchronized to match up with that. You can see this canisters per year there on the right-hand side. We talked about SDUs. In order to operate salt processing, we have to have a place for the grout to be in place once it's produced by Saltstone. We have need dates for the future SDUs. Number 6 is under construction. You can see this is an aerial photo from April, I believe. It's well underway. And then the subsequent SDUs will need to start SDU 7 by FY16 to meet that date. So then, when you roll up these results, we talked about SWPF not supported at the rated capacity and inability to afford tank closures. So we'll do a comparison of where Rev 18 was and what Rev 19 predicts would be the outcome given this levelized funding profile. The last of the type 1, 2, and 4 tanks to have the bulk of the waste removed is out from 2023 to 2028. The last of type 1, 2, and 4 tanks closed is moved out 4 years to 2032. The bulk of the sludge from the rest of the tanks, the type 3 tanks, it's completely removed, or the bulk of the sludge is removed 2030. The bulk of the salt is out by 2033. And the last tank heel is cleaned in 2039. Small column line exchange was included in Rev 18 due to the funding profile. It's not included in Rev 19. Both lines have the next generation solvents and just some other things. They're really nothing different when it comes to max canister throughputs there. So in addition to that base case that I just talked about, we've included an alternative case. And it really addresses the question, well, what would it take to fully support SWPF at the rated capacity when it starts up? And it kind of goes back to fix all those things that I said on the earlier slide that weren't right. So we would need additional funding to have the DWPF enhancements and the Saltstone enhancements, and this means 24/7 operations at the Saltstone processing facility. So Saltstone needs to be staffed to operate around the clock. And we need to get sludge out of the tanks faster. We have a suite of things we can do at ARPMCU to get its throughput up so that the tank space is available when we need it. And we need to increase our canister storage availability. The outputs there, you can see that we're able to, in 27 and 18, have a market increase in ARPMCU throughput. And that, along with those funding increases for the other modifications, enable SWPF to be supported at the rated capacity. Given that scenario, you can see some comparisons there of where the alternate case and the base case of Rev 19 are for some of those parameters. I won't go through them all due to time constraints. And one more thing, after we gave the system plan to DOE for their review, it is approved, by the way. We're having it printed, should be available in about a month. DOE's asked us to develop a third case, and this one is very similar to the alternative where we support SWPF at the rated capacity, but this one is trying to emphasize the bulk removal of waste from the old style tanks, the types 1, 2, and 4. And we've just started this modeling, so I really don't have any conclusions to talk about there. So just the last slide then, we do the modeling so that we can let decision makers make informed decisions. The results of Rev 19 confirm some things we already know and emphasize others. Obviously, SWPF is the key component to our life cycle planning, getting it started and running at rated capacity ultimately determines the liquid waste life cycle. One that is emphasized in this plan that may not have been intuitively obvious in other plans is that operation of ARPMCU, the speed in which that gear turns is critical to the outcome relative to life cycle and our ability to support SWPF. The need to have those modifications done at DWPF and Saltstone to support SWPF when it starts up, and the importance of having the SDUs available when needed. So that's what I had in my slides. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Pete, you mentioned that there wasn't enough funds to route the tanks. until 2024. There was a discussion some time back about not grouting and using the funds that had been appropriated for grouting to go forward with the rest of the tank cleanup. Is that what happened?
In this case, and I said the word to grout, but there are several steps before that. You know, the tanks that need chemical clean. So where we would stop in the model is when the bulk of the sludge, tank 15 is a good example. We're getting ready here in the next year or two to take the bulk of the sludge out and put that in the sludge batch. The next step then is a heel removal campaign, which is relatively inexpensive. And then after that, you get into chemical cleaning, sampling, analysis of the samples, and grouting. So it's that the final cleaning through grouting is what we cannot afford to do. But yes, so kind of back to your premise, with this scenario, any incremental funding we had is prioritized towards supporting SWPF first to get into rated capacity before we start turning available dollars towards that final cleaning, sampling, and grouting.
So I'm assuming that that also includes the 8 tanks that are submerged in groundwater. And given the historical performance of these cleanup operations, those tanks could sit there for many more years before any kind of grouting or final treatment occurs.
Those tanks would be in the 2020s, yes, that's correct. Tank 12 is one of the 4. It's coming up here in the next year-ish, but then 9, 10, and 11, or 11 is the one in 2024, 9 and 10 are after that. Yes, ma'am.
If we looked at slide 13, look at slide 13. If we had slide 13 and went back to revision 17, 16, 15, 14, however far that goes back, would we just every year just see these numbers?
Not always.
Go out farther?
You went back to 16 was the fastest plan. So you had 14, 15 was faster than 14, 16 was faster than 15, and then 17, 18, and 19. So it's kind of been a give and a take. At one time, you know, in the plan, like the Rev 14 time frame, this date was 2032. So we actually pulled back, and Rev 18 got the end date to pretty close. So it has been a give and take, but the last 3 have been pushed out. Yeah.
Is there any reason to think that revision 20 won't be pushed out farther?
Well, that really goes back to why we model changes in inputs. You know, this system plan and these results have been already a powerful tool in communicating a potential outcome if this funding profile remains where it is. You know, I can't really comment on how likely it is to change the funding profile, but I don't know what Rev 20 holds. Sir.
Quick question. You mentioned earlier about the creation or the building of a tank to do the mixture. Was that part of the original planning, or was that something that came up because of new analysis, or what? Yeah. Could you just explain that and how that piece is not part of the original plan, but now?
It has always been part of the plan to prepare the feed for SWPF is to rededicate one of our current waste tanks. You remove the waste from it, so we remove it through ARP-MCU. We have a tank that's also empty, relatively, and then you can use that as your mixing bowl for the recipe. So that has always been part of the plan. In this case, with the slower than previous revision operation of ARP-MCU, we're not able to get that mixing bowl empty to start using it at the time SWPF starts up.
So what would be would it be then best to build a sanitized tank? Rather than
that would be beneficial, but just the time, the dollars to build a new tank would be competing with these other activities. The time to get there would likely be longer than what it would take to actually empty a tank with some incremental funding. So it's something we talk about conceptually. We've been resistant to look at additional tanks, but it is a possibility. Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you for a good
presentation. I just had a quick question from slide number 10. So with the next grouting not occurring until 2024, does that impact the DHEC agreement for cleanup?
Yeah, absolutely. If those tanks are the ones that are mentioned in the FFA commitment for closure of the types 1, 2, and 4 tanks. So if we actually close tanks on this Rev 19 schedule, it would impact that FFA.
Is there a plan to how to, what is that? We have to look for.
I'm gonna have to, yeah.
Is there a plan, Jim Polk, we've had some very preliminary discussions with DHEC and EPA. We've presented some of this information to them and started that discussion of what would it take to look at revised due dates and that kind of thing. We have a commitment that after the salt waste processing facility dates kind of get set now, they're talking about negotiation, discussion on establishing some solid start dates. We'll resume that conversation when we get a little more detail and able to, lock in some of these projections.
Thank you.
Excuse me, we got Tom and then Karen and then...
I'll make it pretty quick. Tom Clements, Savannah Riverside Watch. Thank you. I'm not so confident about the funding levels you project for one thing, but what is the level of confidence at this point that SWPF is actually going to be finished in 2018 and start up and operate? That's a rather abstract question.
Well, I can give a status of where we are on those things we know. Okay. There's been agreement, as you know, for the construction portion of the contract, which was targeting late, about December 2016 to finish the construction aspect. That's before commission. And that contract's in place. They are currently tracking slightly ahead of that schedule. So, that's the hard piece of data I have that says that's looking pretty good. The rest of the negotiation as far as commissioning is still something that's going on between Pam Marks, the federal project director, who briefed the CAB, I think it was about 2 months ago, on that status. And you'll recall, her target she was using was that late October to December 2018 date that we're using here. So, again, we're using the best data that the federal project director has right now. And as she presented back then, that was her gut feel for when that project would be finished up.
Do you have a gut feeling?
I'll rely on the expert, so I'll use her information.
Karen, real quickly, and then we got to press on.
One is, I think I might have misunderstood, the next generation solvent is not going to be used until we get it to SWTF.
Well, we're using it right today. Yeah.
Isn't it there?
It's been deployed in MCU.
My question is, sort of following Tom, I'm sure you did pull that 430 million and 500 whatever million out of space. You've got guidance from somebody. Have you ever gone back and done kind of a sensitivity analysis to see how close what you actually get tracks your guidance?
I'll have to kind of defer that one over to Jim or Sonny.
Yeah, I'll try to take that one on. And I can pick on I guess FY14 specifically. We've looked at, you take the President's budget, you take the omnibus funding that we have. That was I think it was late January when that was issued, and we had assumed about 407. I think we're in about 420 range right now. So, again, from a planning perspective, it's pretty darn close as far as Pete's margin of error, if you will. And then the assumption was that would essentially stay level going out. It's the best data we have. So if you look at that from where we are, actual 420 to a little bit more, and assuming a flat rate of 430 is about as reasonable as we can get right now based on what we have.
Thank you, Pete, for coming up and very good presentation. Now the portion where we have committee discussion time. Did you want to go Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, or you want me to? Oh, yeah. The letter from Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, dated May 16, 2014. Mr. Dave Azinga, Acting Assistant Secretary of Environmental Management, U.S. Department of Energy. Dear Mr. Azinga, the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board is increasingly concerned with the shortcomings in the safe performance work across the Savannah River site. Particular areas of concern include the implementation of worker and facility safety controls conduct of maintenance, and hazardous energy control. Complicating the situation have been the persistently high backlogs of corrective maintenance, increased downtime at processing facilities due to the equipment issues, multiple errors in engineering and nuclear safety documents, and weakness in the training program. One positive factor is that many of these issues have been identified by the Department of Energy facility representatives and engineers as part of their oversight. However, the board is concerned about the implications and collective significance of these issues. The board appreciates the DOE and its contractors share many of these concerns and are implementing actions to improve the performance. While work pauses and all hands briefing have the potential to increase the awareness of the short term of the board, in short term, the board is more interested in institutional actions planned to produce sustained performance improvements in its site's fundamental safety programs. Therefore, pursuant to the 42 U.S.C. 228 6B, Section D, the board requests a briefing within 60 days to 1, identify actions taken by DOE and its contractors to improve the performances at the SRS. 2, to identify how DOE and the contractors' assurance programs will evaluate the effectiveness of these actions. And this is signed Peter S. Winkler, PhD, copied Dr. Moody and Joe Lynn.
So can we request a copy of the briefing when it's finished, once they have it? Is it like a public record, or do they automatically
ask for
send it?
that, didn't we? Did we get that? I thought at the board meeting we already asked for that.
I can't remember if it was part of it or not.
Check, we can check for you.
Okay, thank you.
Find out if it's public record, and if so, I don't have a problem getting it to you.
Well, I think one of the concerns is that the original report was April 4th.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board webpage, where they have there's a weekly safety report. But there's a delay. I mean, I think the one that was posted, I looked today, and I think the one that's posted there is May 9th, maybe, something like that. So it's about a month, right? Okay.
About 4 weeks.
So I think it would be nice if there was going to be, if in a report there was going to be something that's kind of significant or would be of concern to workers and the public, that we get that information before it's actually in that report, and before it's put in that report. I don't know why, but I don't know how it can be released earlier to the public.
I can explain it. This is Dan Burnfield. I'm a staff member at the safety board and one of the authors of this weekly report. When we complete we complete this on a weekly basis as we do our weekly review. And once we complete it, we give it to DOE and the contractors, and they have a week to do first a operational safety security check, and second a factual accuracy check. Okay, to make sure we didn't make a mistake, or we didn't hear something wrong, or somebody didn't speak something wrong. And that's the first week. Then it goes back to DC, and our people in DC read it and question us about the report as to is there anything they didn't understand. And that takes, with people going on travel, that takes about another week. After that's done, it's then sent to DOE headquarters for a final security review, which involves things that might be a compilation of things that the site's really not equipped to handle. For example, it might be you put our report in with the Y12 report, and there's something there that matches up as a safety concern. That typically takes DOE headquarters about 2 weeks, and you're now at a month. So a large portion of this is security that we're concerned about, and there's not much we can do about
So
that.
there's not really any earlier time than anything. So I mean, that's already the month that we've talked about. I mean, that when we see the reports, I mean, they are a month behind. So
You see the reports are about a month behind, and
there's not really any way that that the public could be notified of the results of a report any sooner.
because of the security issues, really, and you know, quite often we do have areas of the site that are pretty intensely involved in security, not just liquid waste.
I think it's pretty impressive that you can get it back and forth and back in a month. I mean, considering everything, I would have thought that would have taken 6 months to a year. So really,
They do report weekly.
I know. So
Pretty fine-tuned, I would hope.
I would hope,
There's
but
also-
still, 4 weeks is
there's also
good.
more than one site we went through this.
Right.
Could I ask a question? Marilyn, I mean, here's the report and forth. What's always concerned me is that, you know, I so much appreciate the work of the safety board for pointing these out, but the question to you and to the CAB is, why is this information not coming from DOE Savannah Riverside itself? They're not putting out these kind of things, and we have to rely on the safety board. I would add, I met with the chairman a couple of weeks ago and one of the other board members and thanked him for this. I mean, was there a mechanism for you, the CAB, to urge the department to be more forthright in revealing this kind of stuff, which is invaluable for the public to know?
Well, I think that was mentioned at our last board meeting. I believe Pat McGuire stood up and told us that they would try to come up with a mechanism to tell us that information, didn't they?
Yes.
I think, I mean, maybe we should put it in some sort of formal recommendation asking for that, perhaps. But Pat McGuire did, yeah, because you weren't at the Savannah meeting.
Let us keep working on it, and it'll get better.
Yeah.
But it all really goes to the transparency issue.
Yeah.
There's already been a commitment to transparency. And we keep having to remind people there's no transparency in many issues. And
Let me address that.
if I could just finish. And in addition to that, what concerns me here is that these are about safety issues. This isn't about processing. This isn't about the long-range discussions on geologic disposition or anything of that nature. This is about safety issues. And are there no mechanisms in case some safety issues have been identified that should receive immediate resolutions? And there seems to be nothing in here that would
Let me answer two of those questions. Number one, as far as availability to the public. For the more significant safety items that result in a violation, for instance, of a technical safety requirement, those are reportable through a DOE process, the ORPS process, occurrence reporting processing system or something like that. So that is a tool to get information out to the public. It's also a tool to share with other contractors, for instance, if there are common issues and that kind of thing. So again, maybe we don't make that tool entirely available to everybody or known to everybody.
It was actually taken down about 1.5 years.
Well, was it? Okay. So there are processes out there, and I think we could work on some of that. From a significance of timeliness, okay, as this letter notes, a number of these issues were identified by DOE, by some of my staff, for example. When one in particular comes to mind, we identified the following day, we had a letter to the contractor expecting a response to that issue, giving them 4 or 5 days or something to that effect to analyze the situation and get back to us. So from a timeliness perspective, again, I can't say 100% of the time. It's like I never guarantee 100%, but we are in the facilities. Our facility reps, that's their job. Our facility engineers are there. We've identified a number of these things real time. I know Pat has the same set of issues. Get it to the contractor, expect an answer within 4 or 5 days. And so, again, I would just contend that a lot of these issues are identified, as noted in here, were identified by DOE and with an expectation of
Could
a
I
very
ask
timely
where
response.
235F falls within that paradigm?
235F is one of Pat's facilities, so I can't speak to it.
It was a safety issue, big time.
But again, you'd have to talk to Pat. I don't know the background behind 235.
I'm Jenny James Camp. I don't want to let the issue drop, so I'm wondering if there's one of our committees that it would be appropriate to assign safety issues to. So, for example, I just don't want another 1,000-page report that he's on 700 pages, and so a committee that could oversee this, that could ask for presentation, and kind of keep this in the loop so we don't let it go. Not that it has before, but, just kind of keep, I don't know whether administrative would be that, or...
It would be hard because I could just see doing a recommendation, and it would have to be really careful because I could see how that would easily fall out of our work scope.
What do you think, Ms. Jerry?
I'm not sure either. We have to really look at what the bottom line of what you're needing before I can really answer. I don't know which committee could do it. I don't know if it's something you want to put on your work plan and right now, or if it's something you need to discuss further and really hone down exactly what you need. It's hard to say out right now.
And, because it can, 235F is one of the serious, so maybe let's just put it under nuclear
It
material.
would be nice if it's discussed at those pods that are happening, if maybe, I don't know, one of the recommendations can kind of tie into that. And I don't know if outreach can even really write a recommendation at all, but it would seem that it would be best to tie in through. Maybe we can make the admin committee write a recommendation. Give us some idea.
Well, the alternative is the safety issues. I mean, sometimes it's a waste, it involves waste, other times it's going to be a new material. So it is cross-cutting all of the committees. So, I mean, if a recommendation were done, I think it would behoove us to have it reviewed by many committees. But
I also think, Louis won't recap, but I also think that what we need to look at is some type of commonality. And I think we're also missing another great issue is that we're talking about a culture 50 years, 50-something years, in terms of oversight that did not engage CAB for many years. So we're going to have to look at commonality as far as what common denominator can we look at across the board. Perhaps maybe even set up a subcommittee, as was mentioned here, to look at those type of issues. But then also take it into consideration that the fact that we're looking at a culture. I totally understand having to send, as you mentioned, those reports to DOE in Washington for review, and then perhaps maybe having to come back in a month or so in terms of that, in terms of having the agencies do that review internal, outside of CAB. So we're going to have those type of discussions.
Do you think it would be good to wait and when that report comes out, the briefing, based on what that has, maybe figure out what committee?
Well, but that's only one. Yeah. That's only on the basis of one report. These reports are weekly. I mean, I don't know that there's ever been a report that says there are no safety issues this week.
No, I mean the briefing from theirs. Has there ever been? Oh, let's focus on that.
No, I kind of might want to stop a minute and think, what issue are you worried about?
Exactly. That's
Okay,
the point I made.
You're worried about DOE's hiding stuff?
Right.
I don't think they are. What more do you want that you don't already have? And is there a problem? Do you want to have some kind of periodic review at some of your meetings once or twice a year? Just kind of pulls all this stuff together. There's plenty of other stuff you guys are looking at, things that, in my opinion, are a lot higher risk than this particular. I don't want to die, but think through what's your issue and what do you want you don't have now.
Dan?
Can I just, a couple of things kind of bother me, I want to make sure you're aware of. Number one is if there's an imminent safety risk, if there's something that is, well, there's two different definitions of imminent. if I'm watching Jim or somebody do something that's wrong, and it's going to get hurt, everybody on the site has the ability to say stop. And they do it. They do it frequently. Okay. The second thing is, if it's an issue that is imminent in that we think it's going to happen over the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something to that effect, we have the ability through our legislation to bring all the powers in Washington down on DOE's head. And that has never happened. Typically, because as soon as we bring one of these issues up to one of the DOE managers, you know, they take care of it. Each one of our, another thing is each one of our letters that we write, we discuss it every other week with contractor and DOE manager. And so and trust me, they take action when we say something. You know, we frequently have either the deputy manager or the manager in the room with us. Very seldom do we not have that. And we almost always have the chief operating officer from the contractor. So that just happens.
I'm going to suggest, since it's come up under this committee, that we just put it on the agenda for the next committee meeting, not for CAP. And just as an explanation, my situation, and I'm going to say our situation, I think it affects all of us. Since I represent the people in my community, what happens is that we're sitting there at our house and an article comes out in the newspaper and my friends call me, you know, and I'm going, okay, I don't know, but I'll find out and get back to you. So that's what I'm saying. I'm explaining our situation as members of the public, and then I'm not hearing a clear direction today, so I'm suggesting that we just tag it on the agenda for this committee. And we'll do some thinking about it over the next couple of months and see what we think of at that time. I appreciate the input from the audience. I mean, it's helpful.
There must be some group of sites that monitors the health, some OSHA or some group. Ask them for a presentation. Ask them for a presentation and ask them to include statistics for safety in food facilities. I think you'd be amazed at how safe these facilities actually are in terms of the whole industry.
Yeah. Well, Marilyn, I still have 235F on my mind. If I recall the information we were giving, it was closed down in 1983. In 2013, it was discovered that there was residual high-level waste.
They always knew that was there.
They knew it was there. Well, why was it decided that in the year 2013 it was a safety hazard?
Well, I think that was they had looked at, DOE knew always knew what the risk was, that it was not a high priority to get rid of that residual plutonium, I think.
So when the DNFS board put their report out, they indicated that it was an imminent risk.
Yeah. Well, if we had an earthquake and a subsequent fire, and that's why they then said, okay, get rid of the combustibles and that kind of stuff.
Well, we could have had that at any point between 1983 and 2005. So my concern is, why do we not have a systematic approach here that takes into account those possibilities?
Can I say something there again? I was first involved in that facility in the early 90s. And Steve Blush, who was at that time Nuclear Safety One, there was a special office within DOE that dealt with nothing but nuclear safety, wrote a very detailed public report on 235F. And the only thing that happened between that report and 2012 was atrophy. And a new look by the safety engineers from the contractor at the potential of an earthquake. And the entire site has been undergoing these looks over the years. And you're gonna see new looks and other new safety aspects over the years, I'm sure. They automatically do that. What drove this is, to be quite honest, a fear that the budget was never going to get better than it was at that time. And we wanted to make sure the action took place, because this facility is not going to get better over time.
You remember that whole site is budget driven. I mean, there's all kinds of risks there, and the DOE is always challenged with, well, where do I spend the money? What can I do with the money I got? And what am I, should I put it in a place to reduce the highest risk? So we're never going to be able to do everything just like that. Everybody likes to do that, but it's not going to happen. The rough thing they go through every year is just deciding where should I spend the money I got this year. Put it in a place where I'm going to reduce the highest amount of risk.
Okay, so we will agree to table this until our next committee meeting. We have to move forward from this point. We're now at the public comment section, and you have roughly 25 minutes. Do you have anybody that's ready to make public comment?
And this is more a question than a comment. Pete, this guy did a great job like they usually do in updating the system plan, which has been around for quite a while. It was there when I worked there, and it was helpful for everybody. And somebody pointed out here that every year it seems like we're slipping back and everything was pushed back. And Pete, I don't know whether that's the answer to this question, but when you do the system plan, where are you? Do you come up with a package and say, look, we've been cut X dollars this year, pushing everything back so many years. What's the increase in life cycle cost every time you make that adjustment? I mean, that's something that I guess everybody knows we're budget limited, but I think it's important that the public and Congress, DOE headquarters, that's a clear understanding that, hey, I'm going to cut you $200 million whatever it is this year, and you guys go and do your thing, you come out and show this slips, this slips, this slips, this slips. Everything slips 4 or 5 years. And that 4 or 5 year slippage in just about every case that I'm familiar with would probably be 4 or 5 times increase in life cycle costs than what you're really saving by whatever's causing the slips. Now, being realistic, you're not going to get all the need. But somebody's got to point that out, and it's going to be in big letters early on, and all the way up the line up to you, O and B. They got to understand these places are causing in the way of overall cost increase. And just as important, the increase in risk that you're getting. Everything you don't do this year has a higher risk. So think about how can you bring that out, bring it high up. Whatever good it does, I don't know. If you don't try, it's not going to do anything.
Have another public comment?
May I?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say, if I heard correctly, and I'll ask the DOE representatives here if I did, that lack of storage space for DWPF canisters was stretching the schedule. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah. One of the facts, when we determined how fast we could run the ARPMCU in the window between now and when the additional storage is available November 18, one of the factors we have to consider is the availability of canister storage locations. Right now, that is not a limiting item. But if we were to accelerate ARPMCU through increased investment, that could become a limiting item, but it is not within the Rev 19 plan.
And just one other quick, not really question, I guess statement is that I think I heard also today that the monitoring and sampling aspects of closing tanks had sort of been deferred to more clean out of tanks, and actually I would applaud that because you're getting more bang for your buck by doing it. Is that essentially, did I hear that?
Yeah. As we give preference to getting the waste out of the tanks, and we expend the funding over the final cleaning and sampling and closure. That's correct.
Yes, thank you. Tom Clements, Savannah Riverside Watch. First question is, transuranic waste, is that this committee or materials? Nuclear materials, okay, I'll make a comment.
No, transuranic here.
Okay, just one thing, and I'm not tracking the whip situation that closely, but I understand that the New Mexico Environment Department had given a June 30th deadline for the material on the surface that was brought from Savannah Riverside that did not go down into the salt mine, but that date, some decision might be made on July 15th. If that material would have to be sent back to the sites from which it came, including Savannah Riverside. So that is going to be right before your next meeting, I think, but there could be some decision about bringing that material back. Now, I don't know if that's a big deal for the cab or for the public, and I might be supportive of it because there are not many options at this point, but I just want to put that on your radar. And secondly, as you know, on June 24th, there's going to be a meeting on the environmental assessment on bringing this German graphite material to Savannah Riverside, and I would encourage the cab to keep in mind the impact of these additional materials in the waste system. Now, I did a search for Germany. I pretty much read the Rev 19. I didn't see anything in there about speculative emissions, which the German one is at this point. But it's unclear to me, and I guess it will be addressed in this environmental assessment, but I think if it goes forward, it'll be in the next plan, I guess, Rev 20. What's going to happen to the byproduct waste from that gas reactor fuel? And I'm all ears to hear what DOE is going to say about that, but I encourage people to come to the meeting on June 24th and comment for the scope of the environmental assessment to be prepared.
At our last committee meeting, the nuclear materials, we had a presentation about the storage of WIP materials, and we were assured that there's ample, secure storage for the material if it comes back.
Yes.
Yeah, there's plenty of space for it. We're not happy about that, but there would be space and it would be secured.
I mean, it looks like to me that might happen, but the biggest problem out there is the accident in the mine and the Los Alamos waste for sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Is there another? Yes.
Going back to the life cycle costs, there is an office and headquarters that tracks life cycle costs for all those areas such as high level waste, low level waste, D&D, et cetera. And they recalculate every year, and of course they get that data that comes from the field sites. They do the whole complex. And if you want a presentation on that, I'm sure we could get someone from headquarters to go over that, review that with you. Those life cycle costs out through time. So quite an elaborate process.
Is there another comment? If there are none, Ms. Jerry has
I just want to make a quick little acknowledgement before we close out this meeting. DOE has for a long time been a supporter of bringing interns into the site to help them to get familiar with the processes and the field of government, the field of nuclear, all of that. And we have been interested in introducing young people also to the public aspect of learning about the site. And with us tonight, this is a complete surprise to her, so I hope she's not embarrassed by it. With us tonight is Eleanor Prater. She is interning with the Office of External Affairs for DOE, and I'm going to ask her to just stand and say hello, but I'm also, because she's at this meeting and intend to attend a few others, I'm wanting her to commit to taking a young person's view of what these meetings, how clear are these meetings, so that we can find ways of being able to improve our processes as well, if you will. So would you just stand and say hi so that they can see your pretty face?
Thank you. My name is Eleanor Prater. Like Derek said, I'm the newest DOE Office of External Affairs intern. I just graduated from UST-18 with a communications and graphic design degree, an emphasis in visual communications and copyright law. So, and I'm very pleased to be the Office of External Affairs. I'm very, very pleased to be here with all of you tonight. And if you want my opinion now or
No. No. We'll do that in private. Thank you. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. Still encourage the CAB members to fill out the feedback forms. We also remind the online attendees to complete the forms that are provided online. Also, don't worry about it. We had a full house tonight. I'd like to thank each and every one of you who joined us with the meetings, and all the presenters and the workers at the Savannah Riverside. Thank you very much for coming in. With that,
Just one request.
Mm-hmm.
When these presentations are put online as PDF files, could we, I mean, I know for the sake of paper we make things smaller, but if the staff would look at them and say, okay, instead of doing 2 of these on a page, a PDF, if we could make it.
We usually do.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because then you can review it and you could read it a little bit better. Okay, thanks.
do we have anything from anybody at the table? Waste Management Committee? Thank you, Nina, for showing up.
Yay. Well, I'm happy there's an intern here, so like grab her, so I can for our project before like Jerry runs over.
Okay, well, if there are no other comments, thank you again, and we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Hey, Tom.
Steve, thanks for showing me the current. Did you have a letter?
I did. No, because Rose hasn't sent it yet, so we're gonna have to wait on my recommendation, I guess, until this full board has it, and then at the next committee, Rose can.
Come on now. You know how.
But I think this one is just too different. So I guess we'll be doing this recommendation 2 and 3, which I think is fine.
I'm ready when you are.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Right now.
Okay. Right now, I'm gonna give you the answer. I'm gonna go ahead and get started, everyone.
Hello, good evening.
I hate sitting with my back to people. It makes me uncomfortable.
I want to welcome everyone, public and SRS. Thank you for coming. I want to introduce the members that are here tonight. Not the chairperson, not the vice chairperson. I am the substitute. So if you see a lot of scurrying around, we've been doing a lot of scurrying around, trying to plug things. As of 4 hours, I've been asked to sit in, so I'm sitting in. And I'm just so glad to know that Vicky's going to be up first. But anyway, let's go around the table and introduce the cab members that are here. Nina?
I'm Nina Spinelli with the cab.
Cleveland Lattimore on the cab.
Harold Simon, cab.
Okay, and I think Marilyn is here also, Marilyn Parsons. So do we have anybody on the website?
Yes. I guess I'm here in person tonight, so.
Well, this is a committee meeting, so we do encourage participation. If anybody would like to come up and sit at the table, you're welcome to do so. We do want to remind you that the meetings are being recorded live, and to state your name and affiliation before speaking, for example, public or an agency that you might be representing, and speak loudly and clearly. Also, fair warning, this does pick up chatter, so if you're talking to somebody beside you, it might pick that up. I will be keeping to the agenda topics during the meeting, and there will be a public comment period where other comments can be heard at the end of the meeting. Anyone wishing to answer questions or address the cab, I don't see a podium tonight. So if you would just stand at your seat, that would be fine, where we can hear you and state your name before speaking. This is the reason we do this is so that the people, if there are people online on the internet, they can also hear you. There is a public sign-in sheet at the back if you would sign in on that. And I think we're going to proceed to our speaker for tonight is Vicki Wheeler, and Vicki will be speaking on Building 235X.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is the first briefing that I've had the opportunity to do for this particular committee. In the past, the work that we've been doing on 235F has been briefed through the Facilities Disposition Committee. So tonight, my focus is really try to get you guys up to speed on the things that have been going on with 235F. I see some familiar faces from the tour that we had last month, so that gave you a perspective of what the facility looked like, and we really appreciate you coming out and doing that. And the third thing, we did get a series of questions that the chair requested that we address tonight, and they have been incorporated in the presentation. So you will see some of those, and I'll point them out as I proceed with the presentation. So my purpose tonight is to update you with respect to the risk reduction activities associated with Building 235F and your update of the recommendation 293. And it basically reads remediation actions cleanup of 235F, which was adopted September 25th, 2012. And just to give you that perspective, I think there was some discussion earlier about 235F when I stepped into the room. Looking at your waste flow diagram, 235F is an F area. The waste that comes out of this will be transuranic waste, and it will go with, just so you guys get that perspective of any material, because it is plutonium-238 that we are cleaning up. It will be transuranic waste. Okay? The next slide basically is to give you a bit of a background, and I'm trying to boil a lot of information into one slide for you guys tonight. There's a lot of documents that have already been published. and they're out there for the public, for you guys to, you know, dive in and get more details, but let me hit the highlights of the history so you can get a general perspective. The facility has had several missions, and I think you heard this, those of you who were on the tour, but primarily fabrication was for deep space missions that were conducted in the 1980s. We have 1.5 kilograms of plutonium-238 material, residual material remaining in the PUF facility, and that's the plutonium fuel form facility. The situation that makes this a concern is that, and I heard some discussion earlier, as I said, when I stepped in to the room, and this is where we have to address the fact that we must clean up or decontaminate the facility. Under an accident situation, and I heard people talk about the seismic initiated full facility fire, and during the tour, you guys kind of got a perspective of what that really meant. You saw how robust that facility is. But if we had that particular scenario to happen, and these slides we had some updates that are not reflected here, but let me kind of address that for you. There is a consequence that there's, you know, an unmitigated situation that will result in both the on-site and off-site situation, and it's been documented in our safety bases as well as what we're doing in response to our project plan, our deactivation plan. So because of those concerns, of the fact that there could be a release of this material under the scenario, and if you want to know more about that particular scenario, we have our safety basis documents and our project deactivation plan that kind of addresses you, gives you that perspective. So if you want to dive into that, feel free to do that. The residual material that's left in the facilities were last measured back in 2006, and it's very conservative. We had to put factors on that, but basically the number that you see today is the number that we are working with. The facility is currently being managed in a safe configuration. We're doing surveillance and maintenance of the facility, and it's being managed, but it is an older facility, and so there's things that have to be replaced, like the roof and things like that, to keep the facility in a good form. The objective of this project is to remove or immobilize the residual material in the pus cells and bring it down to below the 100 rem. Okay? And the end state, you know, that will be negotiated. You know, how do we go down to the D&D arenas? That will be discussed with a co-agreement with our regulators at some later point. Okay? So let's talk about the recommendation. In December, the department issued the implementation plan that to the Defense Board that addressed the recommendation that came forward. Basically, was adopted by this committee. And those areas of concern are summarized here in bullets. And you see there's about 7 of the areas. And the ones that we are addressing, able to address at this particular time, I think we're addressing all of them right now, to be honest with you. We are working toward getting into the cells to demobilize and remove the PU-238. But before we can do that, there's a lot of planning, preparation, and safety requirements that we have to be addressed and put in place before we can move forward with that. So we are in the process of preparing for that. And the removal of transient and fixed combustibles that are not directly necessary. The transient combustibles, we have removed them. We have a program in place that controls those that are being brought in and make sure they are taken out of the facility. Fixed combustibles are things like the carpet, temporary walls. We had cabinets in a break area. Those kinds of things are what we call fixed combustibles. Those could be, you know, help fuel the fire if there was one in that accident scenario that I talked about. So we have removed a majority of those fixed combustibles, but there are more to be removed. And the electrical work, make sure that it's done in a safe configuration. We de-energize components that are no longer needed for the facility in order for us to do work. So that work is being planned as well. We are in the process of updating our fire and alarm and detection system, and you'll hear a little bit about that in the next few slides. And we are continuing to do our emergency response planning. We put that in place. We started last year with drills, and we're including all the co-located people in the F area when we do the drill. Okay, so these are the concerns that came out, and that's what we are working, and that just gives you a little perspective of where we are. Okay, let's talk about the status. We are continuing to implement the actions of the recommendation that came from the Defense Safety Board. We had some challenges with some funding, and so we're looking at some of those actions and deliverables that were committed to by the Secretary of Energy that will be deferred until we can get funding to do them. But the majority of the ones that were committed for 2013 were completed, are now completed. Okay? And we are in the process right now looking at our project plan, looking at the funding level that is provided to us right now, which is $9 million for this fiscal year, and address those deliverables that are part of that implementation plan. So let's talk about accomplishments. And we've had some, and a lot of these occurred in 13, but we want to bring you forward something that we have done. We'll continue to do our surveillance and maintenance of the facility. As I said before, we have funding to maintain that surveillance and maintenance, and it's done in the operations. We replaced the roof. You know, I mentioned that keeping the facility in a safe configuration. We did replace the roof in 12, so we have a new roof. We have developed the necessary plans and control programs that will control the transit combustibles that come into the facility. We also identified our plan for addressing the electrical energization activities. So a lot of that is already laid out for us to start implementation. And you'll hear a bit more about that. We also completed looking at our technical scope associated with fire detection and alarm systems. And we're conducting our drills in the F area in accordance with our emergency response team. Now, we are reporting back to the Defense Board annually on our progress and what our next plans are going to be. So there's active communication in addressing these concerns and keeping everybody in the loop. So these documents, again, are in the public domain. They're available for you. Certainly, just request. The other accomplishments we have formulated a core team of individuals that are knowledgeable in managing the PU-238. You met some of them in passing when you were out at the walkthrough. And we also have a couple of the project managers here tonight, Mr. DeWitt Ziller and Mr. Jeff Hasty. They serve as the project manager and the deputy project manager. So they're here tonight. So if you have any specific operational type questions, they'll be able to address those for you. We completed a project deactivation plan that covers the full life cycle of the project. So that's a document that's, again, it's available for you. We have a mock-up, and unfortunately during the tour we didn't stop by the mock-up, but there is a mock-up that we have that will allow the operators and those who are developing the procedures, the techniques that are going to be used for the decontamination to practice and to learn and to validate what we're going to do as we move into these more complicated areas of decontamination. Okay. So what our plans are this year is to make sure our crew is retained and they're getting some training. And it's very important that we keep the quality of people on this project because they have that expertise in managing plutonium-238. We make use of that mock-up facility I just talked about. And what we have done, we are actually in the field doing some work. And I think you guys kind of saw some of the the work when you were on your tour, and we're scheduled to complete the installation of our fire detection and alarm system by September. And we're on track to remove the fixed combustibles, those that we need to remove for this area. And we're looking at completing the de-energization work as well. So progress is being made. We're addressing those concerns, and we're moving forward based on the funding that's provided for the project. Now, along with this, there's documents. There's always documents associated with the work that we do because of the safety. And so with that, we have to make sure that our safety basis documents, those baselines that are established are maintained. And so we're doing a phased approach on how we will move into doing the work in this facility. So right now, we have an implementation plan for our safety bases. We're just proceeding in a cautious manner to ensure that we start, I think you heard, start with the cells that didn't have that much contamination that we know of, and progressively learn, stop, do some lessons learned, make sure our approach is correct. Then we step to the next area. So we're looking at cells 6 through 9 are the very important ones for us to start with, and then we'll move to the ones that have the larger amount of contamination in them. Okay? So just to kind of give you a picture of what it looks like in our planning for this project, as I stated earlier, we are this year doing our fire alarm and detection, fixed combustibles, and de-energization work. We also are looking at our safety targeted implementation of our safety program, and also along with this, we're looking at the tools and the techniques that we're going to be using to actually perform this work. We're getting assistance from the Savannah River National Laboratory in getting us new and innovative ways to actually approach this. And we're going to complete our crew acquisition. We're going to bring in those people that have that expertise and try to get them to start the training. In 15, we are planning toward moving more into the invasive work and moving into the cells. We'll complete our readiness reviews, isolations, begin our intrusive work, primarily looking at window replacements, because those of you on the tour, you saw that the conditions of the windows, and we're going to, pull some of the windows so that we can see, be able to clean so we can see into the cells. Manipulator replacements, you saw the status a little bit of what the manipulators, but you also have a picture in your packet. And look at our enhanced characterization, going back in and doing a more detailed type of surveying of the area so that we can have an accurate accounting of what is actually there before we start our cleanup. And then in the out years, we'll move forward in 16 to 19, get into cells 6 through 9. Like I said, do our lessons learned, update, learn from that, proceed into cells 1 through 5, and do our final measurement and surveillance of the facility. So that's our strategy, our plan, and it addresses those concerns that were identified in that recommendation that came forward. So in summary, we are making progress. We are looking at our funding to be established somewhere, anticipating our funding to be established somewhere around $9 million is our plan. And we plan to, again, maintain that crew team, update the fire and alarm and detection systems this year, remove the combustibles, and complete our electrical work on those components that we no longer need. With that, have any questions?
Marilyn Parson, Ken. So today, with the work that has been done, how much of the risk has been reduced? I mean, if we had an earthquake, would we have enough of these other steps been taken, removing combustibles and all that stuff? What would be the risk reduction at this point in time?
Let me attempt to answer that from the standpoint that the work that we've done so far is preparation.
Okay.
Okay? Removing the potential other ignition sources. Okay? But the primary objective is to get into the cells and do the decontamination work, and that's where we will see a reduction.
So at this point,
The only thing I would add, Vicki, is I think it's fair, Whit Beeler, project manager. I think it's fair to say that the removal of all the transient combustibles that you mentioned reduces the possibility or the likelihood of a propagation.
Okay.
Other than that, I would agree with what you said.
Okay. And who's the contractor?
Savannah River Nuclear Solution.
Okay.
Okay.
Tom Clements, Savannah Riverside Watch. 2 questions. If there's approximately 1.5 kilos of plutonium-238 left in the facility and it's spread in the glove boxes, is there an estimate of how much transuranic waste would be produced by removing whatever may be removed plus whatever of the plutonium is removed?
So if you, I'm sorry, you.
No.
And Jeff worked in solid waste for a long time, so he may need to jump in and help. But the straightforward answer is obviously the amount of true waste is what you just said, is the amount of holdup that's in the cell. I think maybe that the question would be along the lines of how many packages are we going to have to create to take that amount of material that's in cells, package them compliantly so that we don't get too much in one package, which is an important consideration for acceptance at the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico, and then get all of that dealt with on site, characterized, and shipped off. I can't really tell you right now how many containers we're talking about. It will span a period of time, Jeff, I would say 18 months or so. We'll be in there working, pulling material out, packaging it up the same way we do all true waste on site. It's just that with 238, as I'm sure you're aware, the activity is so high, you have a really small amount in each package. So we'll be getting more containers than we would with a lot of other material. But other than that, it's just a matter of working our way through what's there. Yes.
This is Tony Polk, Department of Energy. Also, Tom, keep in mind, it's not just the material itself, but the contaminated equipment and other things that are in there that will be gathered in
bigger volumes. Related to that, on slide 5, one of the bullets, small font, was immobilized and will remove the residual plutonium-238. So I'm curious as to what immobilized would be, and does that imply that the end state of the facility might be in situ disposal, or whatever you call it?
Great. So keep in mind that the phrase that Vicki quoted there was the words of the Defense Board. So what they want is that the MAR is either removed or immobilized. They didn't presume to tell us how to deal with it. They just said it needs to be one or the other or some combination of those so that we reduce the risk to an acceptable level. Our approach is, as we have kept this as simple as we possibly can. The first thing we're going to do is remove everything that is reasonably possible to remove. Okay, so we don't want to leave anything in there to have to immobilize. So as Tony said, pieces of equipment, components, piles of aluminum oxide that I'm sure you saw some pictures of while you were on the tour, all of that stuff we will remove out, bag out, just like we would any waste, and ship it like we talked about. When we talk about immobilization, there are some things that I can easily foresee us a couple of years down the road deciding it makes a lot more sense to immobilize this than to go to extraordinary measures to try to remove it. I'll give you a good example. In cell 1, there was a furnace, which is what they use to heat the oxide up and get it ready for ball mill. That furnace has lots of little crevices in it where small particles over the years that it was in operation have settled. So it doesn't make much sense to spend 6 or 8 months trying to go tear that up destructively and get a little amount out. That's the kind of thing we look at, that small amount of residual material. We look at how we could immobilize that. But fundamentally, we're not looking at grouting a whole bunch of stuff in place and walking away from it. We're looking at removing the material. And then where we have to, we immobilize small parts. We'll use fixative on the walls for those small amounts of contamination that are always going to remain. Okay, no matter how hard you scrub, I learned that at rocket class. So no matter how hard you scrub, there's always something there. So we'll fix that in place. And then at the end of the project, as Vicki said, we'll measure and see if we've hit the target. If we've hit the target, life is good. We go get ourselves ready to stay in the surveillance and maintenance mode, and the building remains there until the department and the state down the road come to an agreement through the CAB and others on what the final disposition for the building is going to be. If not, then we have to replan how the department's going to go after the remaining amount of material and what's the right path for doing that. I think the real key, and I'll shut up, the real key for this job has been we tried from day one not to bias any final in-state decisions that the department and the state would want to make. So removing material and doing a small amount of fixing, that leaves the table open down the road. If the feeling at the time is the right thing to do is tear the building down to a slab, which we looked at back in 2005 when I came on board here from Colorado, that's an option. We know how to do that, and that's one way of approaching it. Another one is leave the building where it is, go into those cells, grout what's left in place, and it's immobilized. It's not going anywhere. We've already got studies that show that. So that's a way to approach it. So we're not setting it up to where at the end you have to go one way or the other. We try to leave it as a level thing.
George, I agree. You gotta get 235S down to some position where it's safe. And now my understanding was how to get into this whole scenario was that we had the big earthquake and we had the big fire and it spread all the 238 that's in the building now. But now follow up on Marilyn's question. Y'all have removed a bunch of the combustibles. So the fire isn't going to be as bad as it was when the first study was done. Now, the question I would have would be, you're going to spend X million dollars more to get where you want to be, and I agree you want to get there eventually. But whatever that amount of money is it better to be spent on something in waste management? Tank farm, we just heard a presentation before this one about X year delay because of funding. And the tank farm is the biggest risk in the state of South Carolina. But has anybody looked at, you're going to spend, I'm going to make a number of $25 million or whatever it is to finish this up, spending the money on the schedule that we're showing here, or should that money be spent someplace like in the system plan where you're going to reduce the greater risk? Any thought been given to that?
Pat McGuire with DOE. We're trying to balance and make progress to reduce risk across all areas of the Savannah River site. 235F, liquid waste, nuclear material, soil, and groundwater. So we're trying to balance and make some progress across all areas. While we've made progress to reduce the probability of a fire by removing those transient combustibles, by de-energizing unnecessary equipment, from an analysis standpoint, you cannot credibly say that that accident progression is now incredible such that you can't have that release of a plutonium-238. While, as Vicki said, we've made some improvements, when the analysts go in and try to make calculations to say what's the probability of this earthquake, you're not changing the probability of the earthquake. Of a fire starting, yeah, you've reduced it because you don't have as many transient combustibles and fixed combustibles, but to quantify that from a calculation and say the actual risk is less, it's very, very difficult, or if not, I don't think you can get there, because if you have some combustibles and some electrical loads, you can connect A to B and you can still have that accident. It's less likely, but in an analysis phase, it's hard to quantify that. It's very difficult. So understand the application of funding to reduce risk, and liquid waste is a very high priority for us. This is also a high priority, and we're trying to make progress across all those different functional areas. This is something we take very seriously at 235F, and until we start removing things like Vicki and DeWitt said, and actually removing the plutonium-238, that's where we're going to make real progress in reducing the actual risk.
Any estimate on how much money now to get to that point where you maybe reduce the risk?
Yeah, right now, we're, as Vicki and DeWitt said, we've done a lot of planning. We've done some work in the facility to remove those combustibles. We're nominally thinking $9 million a year, probably for about 5 or 6 years. So it's a significant, I mean, it's going to add up to $40 or $50 million. That's a significant amount of money. Now, $9 million, could you produce 500 canisters instead of 100 over in DWPF? No, you're not going to make that much progress with $9 million more in liquid waste. You can make a significant investment in 235F. We're balancing that, yes.
Whatever you can do with the information you got.
Yeah, and that's what and we think we're doing a good job, having a viable program here, having a viable program in liquid waste, having a viable program in soil and groundwater, nuclear material. So we believe we're doing the best we can with the funding. People may second guess us, and I appreciate, respect, and understand that. So we're trying to make progress and reducing the risk across all areas of the Santa River site.
Well, Vicki, we want to thank you for your presentation. We appreciate it. James, I'm going to go back up to open recommendations. We have 3 recommendations that are open at this time under this committee, 307, 313, and 314. And for a number of reasons, I'd like to recommend that we just keep 307 open at this time. We can discuss it at the next committee meeting as to what we want to do with that status. And let's move to recommendation 313 and 314. What I'd like to say to introduce these, recommendation 313 is L-basic inventory as a trial test for a federal repository. Recommendation 314 is planning for disposition of SRS canisters. We've had DOE responses for both of those, and those are on the record on the website. My thinking right now is that, and I'm prepared today, but that I'd like to close 313 and 314 since we've received DOE feedback on it. And I'm prepared to present a new recommendation today that's going to touch on the subject in a little bit different fashion, and I'll present that during the next section of the meeting. Is there any discussion of closing 313 and 314? If not, can I assume that everybody is in agreement to close 313 and 314? Okay, then we'll proceed to do that at this time. Let's move forward to our new recommendations that we want to discuss at this meeting. And I'd like to start with a draft recommendation titled Innovative Methods. It should be in your packet. Innovation Methods for Remediation of Used Nuclear Fuel and Defense High-Level Radioactive Waste. The recommendation manager did just a fantastic, unbelievable job on the background and history of this. I'm not going to go into 5 pages of background and history, but what I will say is that what led into this was a presentation to the board by Dr. Ed Sadowski from Savannah River National Labs, if I've got that right, SRNL, concerning the history and the ongoing scientific research that's taking place both here and at other laboratories across the United States concerning how are we going to deal with this waste? What's the best, what's the most efficient way to deal with nuclear waste, spent nuclear fuel, highly enriched uranium, TRU, all those controversial areas of high concern to the public. We were so impressed with Dr. Sadowski's presentation. We were so impressed by the research and the scientists at the lab that our feeling at the end of, he presented it both to the committee and then he presented it to the full CAB board in Savannah, that we thought we would come up with this recommendation to support the efforts of the laboratory. So these are the recommendations that we thought about, and I would welcome any input on it. The recommendation number 1 is at an upcoming session of the South Carolina, is Karen here now? At the upcoming session of the South Carolina Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council, Karen Patterson is the chairperson, that our SRS provided expert, SRNL, Dr. Sadowski, is highly recommended to present the status of emerging technologies to address disposition of nuclear waste stockpiles at SRS. That was the first part. The second part I invite any comments on. We suggest that DOE convene an annual global experts panel to critically assess and prioritize DOE funding for nuclear waste technologies that do not include deep geologic storage. Given the significant complexity and uncertainty of emerging nuclear waste technologies, participants will be tasked with developing an in-depth decision tree analysis, incorporating risk ratios at critical chance nodes. I can't explain what that is. I'm sure one of you back there can, but we took it from a good source. The analysis will be updated on a yearly basis. It's further recommended that the experts panel be held at SRNL. And I'm asking, is this already occurring someplace? Is there some sort of experts panel that's repetitive? Okay, if not, then we'll leave it here to be explored. For those of you who are new to CAB, what will happen is that once these recommendations pass the committee, it will go forward to the CAB, the full CAB meeting, the full public forum for discussing and any additions or changes.
Well, can we add just a little one to number 2, where it says assessment priority funding, is if there was a way to incorporate the funding part to pay for that panel. So I imagine if DOE is going to do that, it's probably going to be costly. You would have to bring those people and you'd have to have a facility. I could just imagine the cost of it, and it's a great idea, but if we can maybe just incorporate a way to consider how to fund that.
Yeah, I like that. The words aren't coming to my mind right now.
That was my part. You'll have to do the second part.
The only way I can think off the top of my head is either a 2A, which may be the best way to do it. Also, that funding be provided.
Funding be sought.
That's a good.
We want DOE to seek funding to convene this.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess let's just put it as a 2A instead of a.
So we just add it as an end to the sentence, or do you think it should have its own little subhouse?
I have no problem with adding it. Yeah, I like that. It's the money to make it come about. I like it also because it would highlight the expertise that we've got here in Aiken County at the Savannah Riverside.
Mm-hmm.
Add it at the end.
Okay. I would switch and instead of also, because otherwise it's not a sentence. Delete the period and put and. I like it.
Can I ask you? Go ahead, Tom. Tom Clements, Public. I just skimmed through this while sitting here, and it seems to address commercial spent fuel primarily. But in the recommendation, number 1, it says to present the status of emerging technologies to address disposition of nuclear waste stockpiles at Savannah Riverside. I'm not quite sure what that nuclear waste stockpile is. After talking about spent fuel, I don't know if it's talking about research reactor fuel stored in L Basin, but I'm a little confused as to
I'd like to
CAB is getting into the commercial spent fuel disposition arena here.
It was a term that's more general there.
Would that be the,
That's one of the paragraphs that I had suggested we delete was the thing about the commercial, the discussion of commercial fuel in the background. But I found that to be, confusing as well if we were talking about commercial.
Is that on page 2?
Yeah.
the second paragraph in the bottom?
Yeah, I had suggested deleting that.
Yeah.
Marilyn, do you want us to pull up the version that you added in? We never got confirmation from Rose that James should save it as a separate file.
Which I didn't, since I had sent it to Bill and I didn't get any response back, so I didn't know how we were handling edits at this point.
I'm just saying, if you want, we can pull it up to show everyone else how you edited it.
Because there are other people that did edits also, weren't there?
Is that the only thing that you edited?
I deleted some other paragraphs.
Okay, can we pull that up?
But I don't know how you wanted to, you were on that part, so you're discussing it, so however you want to proceed.
No, I appreciate you bringing it in, and I think we're in agreement to go ahead and delete that paragraph on commercial, bottom of page 2. Is that what you're saying?
It's, yeah.
Okay, and then what were your other?
Okay, and then on page 4, well, let me tell you what, I had read this, and then I had asked my husband does a lot of editing for me or reacting to things because he doesn't sit here. So he's interested in Savannah River sites because of my involvement, and of course he is interested. But I often have him read stuff. So I gave this to him. I didn't bias him. I said, would you read this and just give me your reaction in terms of, do you understand what the concern is of what we're asking DOE to do? And he read it, and he said, I think it's very well written. He said, I think it's a bit long. He said, I'm concerned that, he said, I kind of started to lose interest and wondered where it was going before I actually got to the recommendation part. So we sat down together. I said, okay, show me what you think we could get rid of. And he found it wasn't as easy as you might think. He kept saying, no, I think that's important for the public to read that as part of the background. So we didn't come up with, I thought he might suggest cutting more of it than he did. So anyway, so these paragraphs were things that he and I talking together, we felt like it would work. So it was, like I said, it was just, I just did it to see what people thought. On page 4,
that's what we're here for.
on page 4, I suggested deleting the second and third paragraph. I didn't feel like it added much. I didn't think it, by getting rid of those two, took away from, because it's talking, it was about the WIP facility. Right. And I felt like it gave more information, more background, more detail than we really needed at this. I mean, I didn't think it enhanced the understanding, so we got rid of those two. And then at the bottom of page 4, the last sentence, it gives additional information about what Professor Neil Hyatt and what they actually did. I felt like we didn't need that extra explanation. So
Approximately? Is that the one that starts with approximately, or it's safe?
It's the last, it begins, based on the checkered history, and then it's the last sentence there that begins Professor Neil Hyatt.
It's slightly different on our copy.
Okay, it is.
So you might want to go back and say what's the first line of the deleted ones? Is it New Mexico and prominent? On page 4.
On page 4, the paragraph, the second paragraph, DOE officials have here, we got rid of that one.
That's not our.
Hold on a moment, yeah, that's what I'm saying. The two that is here for us is New Mexico, starts with New Mexico and then prominent. But you're talking about DOE officials.
That's the bottom of
That's at the top of page 4, second paragraph.
Yeah, that's the bottom of page 3 on ours.
last sentence.
Here, I'm gonna.
Do we have different paginations? I mean, this is
a later version that's passed out today.
Oh, okay.
Which you.
I'm sorry, this is what okay. All right, so do we have it though?
So we're gonna take out the paragraph that starts with DOE officials have zeroed in.
Yeah, what's the rest of it? What is it?
Maryland Waste from Los Angeles.
I haven't seen what you have, Marilyn.
Oh, do you?
At the bottom of page,
Here, let's-
well, the paragraph that begins based on the checkered history.
Based on the check, okay, that's that's page 4, second from the bottom.
Or at the bottom.
Yeah, second from the bottom.
All right, and the last sentence of that paragraph, which says Professor Neil Hyatt and his Sheffield colleagues.
What does that start with?
Wait.
It's a paragraph that begins based on.
It's
the
right
checkered
after 80 to 90%.
Okay. Oh, so are we taking out the whole paragraph or just that sentence?
That sentence after 80 to 90%. It just added more detail about the process that I didn't think added much. And on the next paragraph that starts researchers at the University of Notre Dame. The fourth line down in that paragraph begins Albrecht Schmidt's team.
Okay.
I took the rest of that paragraph out. Again, I didn't think that we needed that much detail about what the researchers were doing.
Ours is a really long paragraph. Does yours end with waste dilemma? Oh no, they're just combined. Ours ends with for decades.
Yeah.
Does that sentence Albert, and then the last couple of words at the end of the paragraph, storage has...
It says storage has been an issue for decades.
Okay, yeah. So down through there.
Okay, I like all those.
But I mean, that doesn't shorten it. I mean, that's what we came up with.
Yeah. So are we taking out the one, this is New Mexico's Environment Secretary?
Yes.
We are taking out that one, we're taking out prominent geologists.
And prominent geology.
No, we're not taking out prominent geologists.
You're taking out New Mexico's
We're taking out DOE officials have zeroed, and then the next one I have is a paragraph, New Mexico's Environmental Secretary Ryan Flynn.
Okay, so that's our page 3.
Okay.
DOE,
I'm sorry, okay.
it's okay, so we're taking out that one, then we're leaving the New Mexico.
No.
Yeah, no, you're killing New Mexico as well.
Not New
Yes.
Mexico.
Okay,
You need
so we're
to
leaving
just-
prominent.
Yeah.
Well, this is fun.
Those were, and I had one other word that will, when we get to the third other, but that's all I had.
Question, can we continue to edit this at the CAB meeting?
On the first day, yes. The first day we can, yes.
We're okay to keep working on this. Just the audience, our recommendation manager is not here today, so we're all trying to kind of fill in here and, Pat, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a couple comments. Recommendation number 1, we talk about the Governance Nuclear Advisory Council. DOE does not control that. That's not under our area of responsibility. You can recommend anything you want to us, so let me preface that. But we have no control over their agenda. We have no control over them. We have no influence whatsoever. And again, Jerry, I would think if they did send this to us, we could send a copy to Karen maybe, but that's all we can maybe do. Again, that's outside of our area of influence.
And we'd have to state that it's out of our area, so we're just forwarding a copy.
We're just forwarding it. We can't.
I was going to say that I had said the same thing. In talking, but how can we ask DOE to do something to get on an agenda for a group that they don't control? Now, we could say that they could work with this group to have a presentation or something, but just to say, get on there, I thought that was, I mean, is there some other way that this information could get out to, I wasn't sure, who do we want
All right, how about if we just
to be given to?
the first words of that, so it would say, CAB recommends that DOE work with South Carolina Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council to provide an expert. Would that be?
However you want to do it, we can't control what they do.
No, but
And
you
you know,
could,
Karen comes here, we have a very good relationship,
right.
there's no
So it
doubt.
might be possible.
We could collaborate,
Yes,
something of that nature. But again, we can't commit.
right.
and the timing of when that is.
They can't come up with an agenda for an organization that's not there.
Are you invited to participate in those? Like, do you have like a regular time frame?
They develop their agenda. Most of the time, DOE is invited to talk about some subject on their agenda. So we're engaged with them. We're invited to participate. I personally go myself every quarter, just to stay up to date with the various topics. So she calls us with a variety of topics that she and her panel would like to hear about, and we support her whatever, with whatever presentation she wants.
I'm kind of hearing that one needs to go. What do y'all think?
Let's ask Rose to call Karen.
Yeah, that's what
I don't see any reason that we can't ask DOE to work with them to try to accomplish this, and if they
That's
can't,
all it is.
they can't.
That's right.
To say.
Recommend to us whatever you want,
Yeah.
and we'll do the best we can.
Yeah.
I just want to provide,
To say, just do it at an upcoming meeting, we can't do that, ask you to do that, because you can't do that.
the other, with regard to that recommendation number one, it talks about nuclear waste stockpiles.
Right.
And just a point of clarification, I'm not sure what you mean. You probably are including spent fuel in there. Spent fuel is not waste. Okay, so again, what I would take from this, it would be talking about, I guess, the glass canisters, and that would be it. All your background talks about a lot of different things, so if you want more than glass canisters, I don't think Dr. Sagowski, what my recollection was, had nothing to do with disposing of glass waste storage containers. It mainly focused on different means to disposition spent nuclear fuel.
Okay.
So there was somewhat of a disconnect from what I'm. So I'm kind of struggling. What do you want to know?
We did talk about technologies to reduce what would become vitrified.
The waste coming, it was the various technologies to process, disposition spent fuel could result in lower amount of volume.
That was all spent fuel, not.
It was spent fuel specific, not waste stockpiles. Waste stockpiles are what we already have, is the way I'm understanding, and that's our glass waste storage.
So could we change, like, just 2 words instead of at? Could we do for an upcoming session, and instead of provide, do offer an expert?
She may want her own expert. You're right. You're very good, Nina.
And that way, just by changing 2 words, DOE can make that offer and fulfill a recommendation and not be at their scheduling.
For me.
All right, so what do we do with the nuclear?
I'd say
take out nuclear waste.
What's that? I'm thinking at the bottom of number 1, to address disposition of spent nuclear fuel is more in line with what we're.
Yes.
So at the bottom of number 1.
Take a sec.
Okay, keep the word disposition, add the word of spent nuclear fuel, keep at SRS. You already finished, and I'm still hey, here. And again, part of this is just writing things, but again, some of it's going from the person who managed the writing of it to try to bring it with what we want to do today.
Jenny, just another, if I could, in the second one about this global experts panel, again, the recommendations from a panel, Congress would have to act on whatever this panel is saying. Again, I'm not really sure what DOE would do with that. Congress is who provides us funding, and what an expert from France would say, I'm not sure what our Congress would do with that expert advice. we can, again, you're free to recommend anything you want to DOE. And it's good to get a variety and diverse set of ideas. I agree that, and that's what it looks like you're looking at. To prioritize DOE's funding, again, that's an act of Congress to provide that funding. So I just am kind of explaining what I would do with this information once I get it. And that's why trying to gather what would you want? What's the end result? I guess it sounds like you want people like Dr. Sadowski and his colleagues from around the world to have a conference and discuss things. And then the lab does that kind of already. They go international. They talk about a variety of different things.
Is there a point at which they would come to SRS to present or hold a panel? Is this rotated around? Or?
The specifics that you're talking about, I'm not aware of a specific conference for this specific item. They go, the lab has national, world-renowned experts on a variety of topics. They go to conferences all over the world. Those conferences, again, are held on schedules, and it's hard to dictate when they would go where. They may never occur in the United States on this topic for a number of years, or they may be coming next week. If they come to the United States, they may be going to Las Vegas to have the conference. So it's difficult. We can take this recommendation, evaluate, and work with you and provide you information how the lab could best participate and support these things to have these discussions.
Just my 2 cents. I like number 2. I still want to toot the horn for SRNL, and the worst that can happen is they say no, which is
And again,
outside their control. So,
but you're on the right track. The National Lab is a key resource in a lot of this information that's in this background, and we can provide some information on the types of conferences that they're already attending, and they're already discussing these things and sharing inputs from around the world on what other countries are doing. It sounds like that's what you want. What's the rest of the world doing with this and similar problems?
Yeah.
And we can share that information.
It doesn't have to be a face-to-face conference either. There's a lot of virtual ways these meetings could be held.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to pay for someone to come from France.
Mm-hmm.
So just when it says an annual panel, it doesn't have to be a face-to-face meeting. But in that paragraph, there are some couple of will that should be changed to should.
okay, and but I'm also uncomfortable with global experts. I would just as soon say convene an experts panel, so we're not leaning any particular direction. What do you think about that?
Okay. Oh, we have a question.
Angela Adams, DOE. Do you want the panel to assess and prioritize the funding, or do you want them to assess and prioritize the technology?
I think what was really nice at the presentation that we had was that it almost felt like it was the first time that there were these other solutions that were presented about what could happen. And I think for a lot of us in the cabinet, it was the first time that there were all these other technologies that were discussed, and it was really great. And I think the point of this number 2 was to kind of keep that momentum going.
I don't think we had this one to do with funding. It had to do with the exciting experiments and research that were going on, and that we weren't aware of that was going on right here.
And that's my point, is the way it's written is the panel is to critically assess and prioritize DOE funding for nuclear waste technology.
Yeah, so I guess
think what I'm hearing is you want them to assess and prioritize the nuclear waste technology.
Oh, I'm just glad I took my stilettos off every time I shake you. Just wearing flip-flops.
Still have that waste issue.
Not your waste issues also. I'm thinking scratch it and just put an annual panel to present nuclear. How did we do it in the first one? Spent spent nuclear fuel technologies.
Or if you want to say, I mean, nuclear material and waste technologies, how, you know, just to make sure if that's what you're asking for.
Yeah.
Because you may want plutonium also.
Yeah.
If you just say spent fuel, you're not going to get plutonium.
So people from the site obviously go to these international conferences pretty regularly. So, I mean, could we maybe just scratch the convene and do receive input from these conventions? Because if they're already going and they're already learning about it, I would hate for y'all to...
Same one.
No, but it would be even better if they would have different ones, and then just like we had that presentation, have these subsequent ones where what they've learned, they can come back. Because I think we're asking for two things. I think there's a difference between asking for updates on the technologies that they can use to disposition versus we're trying to get people to SRNL so we can show how great it is. So it almost would seem that those two things need to be separate. Because I'm just thinking, as diplomatically as Pat is trying to say it, they're going to come back with a big no for number 2. Because there's just, I don't think there's any way to do it. So,
why do you think there's no way to do it?
he's right, they're going to have to go through Congress, and that's going to be legislation.
You have to go through Congress to have a conference call.
Well, a call.
You mean DOE at headquarters could not invite people and have a meeting, a virtual meeting?
No, what I was saying,
Funding such a thing, but there must be.
all I'm saying is the results of this. Let's say we're very successful. We brought 50 experts from across the world. We had a meeting at SRNL, and they came up with all these recommendations.
Right.
So what? Because Congress has to then, that's what you said, prioritize DOE funding. Now, it sounds like you're going to scratch that.
I would get those words
get
out
rid
of
of
there.
that. Okay, and that's where my comment was.
Okay.
That, so what
Yeah,
of
yeah,
all these experts? Gotcha. Yeah. So we're on the same page.
I get
I think we need to, just go home and rewrite number 2.
Okay.
And then do that again.
But get rid of the DOE funding in there part.
So
definitely the expert. I mean, they can't. They might be able to prioritize
Technologies is what you want,
what would be
information.
the most, maybe cost. I mean, they might do cost effective or something like that.
Most
But
value added type thing, whatever it is.
Yes.
So, James, I can't see, and I think Jenny was just saying that, what word did we use for number 1, where it used to say nuclear waste stockpile?
It's spent fuel.
Okay, so we need to put that where nuclear waste technology is for number 2. Do we just need to keep taking out the word nuclear waste and just keep putting?
But the geologic storage is nuclear waste.
Yeah, so if you just want to have nuclear materials and waste.
Okay, yeah, there you
Put
go.
nuclear materials and waste technologies, and then that'll cover.
Funding for nuclear waste,
materials
Nuclear
and
materials and waste.
technology.
That would kind of be more broad.
Okay.
And I think Nina was going down the path of maybe adding it to your work plan, so you've got a presentation every year.
I would love a presentation like what we had every year.
That direction on number 2 works for me.
You don't need a recommendation for that, you can just put it in your work plan.
Let us think about this a little bit, because it's...
The other thing I would suggest is coordinate with the Waste Disposition Committee, because this is heavily involved with waste.
This is what I was going to say, this should be approved by both committees if we're going to.
Okay, number 3. I know what it's intended in number 3 and not. Number 3, designate priority status for the conduct and funding of research and development of chemical separation technologies at SRS, SRNL. That may not be the right word. Funding should permit sufficient scientific staffing needs and execution of research projects under the leadership of Drs. Terry Mitkowski and Sadowski. In addition, impactful grant dollars will be made available for strategic collaborations with leading private firms and university researchers. Okay, so the purpose of this paragraph is to get some money, more money, to help with the research and development at SRNL. And again, I'm a teacher, so whether to use the word nuclear waste or spent fuel or whatever, I need you guys to tell me the correct usage of the terms. So.
Yep, again, I'm just gonna provide input. You guys do whatever you want, okay? I need to caveat that every time. My suggestion was delete, replace chemical separations with nuclear materials and waste disposition technologies. You just want to hear a lot, and not just on chemical separations. You want nuclear material and waste disposition, I think. Okay. The second sentence permits sufficient scientific staff and needs under the leadership of Mikowski and Sadowski. I don't think it's your place to direct the contractor how to do work. Okay, if the SRS wants to give it to another scientist, that's their business. You can suggest whatever you want, okay? I would just delete that second sentence. I really think that's outside of your purview to direct a contractor who specifically should do what work.
All right, I'm okay with that, since the first sentence deals with the priority status for conduct and funding.
Why don't we say seek increased funding for the conduct and funding of research or something?
So seek
seek increased funding for
like that,
conducting for the conduct of research and development of, and however we changed chemical separation. I don't know, what is it?
Yeah, nuclear materials and waste disposition. It's your committees, your two committees. Just think of that, nuclear materials and waste, and you should cover your everything.
Be a teacher. Okay, so we.
Everybody in Dr. Sadowski's presentation, he talked about the lab-directed research, and that's how they do the research. That they have a pot of money, and they have a panel that goes through and selects which research activities get funded. So if you're in support of that, or you want to put priority on the nuclear materials, you could put that into the recommendation.
That's a good idea.
You may, what do you have, seek increased funding for laboratory directed. So James, after seek increased funding for laboratory directed research, or research and development.
Are we just on our first recommendation?
But this is good.
Yes.
It's worth it though. The third sentence, I think, is directed
like a dog.
Outside grants, to see if we can pull in any outside grants. So it's currently it says in addition, basically grant dollars will be made available for strategic collaborations with leading private firms. Okay, you're way out of my league there. So it looks like the purpose of that sentence is to try to pull in monies from outside sources like grants, private firms, and universities.
We do. In addition, I think they're already doing that. So could we just do continue to make available, or continue to utilize strategic collaboration?
And to that.
And with DOE, I think that the lab goes out and they seek grants and they are called up and they're given grants. I don't know that this should be in the recommendation. That is what they do already.
So the first sentence would cover this kind of activity, because they do give grants as part of their program, don't they? That we don't need that last sentence because it would be included in their.
Seeking increased funding would be something that the department can address.
Well, maybe if the concern here was to get for other doing it, to get input from private firms and university research. We could up here, seek increased funding for blah, 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 including grants for those people, if we wanted to. We could do it that way.
Increased funding.
Where are you gonna put the including after funding? Grants, comma. Or,
Driving back to. Georgia.
There's a lot of strike.
I hate driving on 20 in the dark. To Columbia, it is.
Including grants
Try.
for, I think we need to have the
Low level.
part in there. We're gonna, grants for,
Why are you?
public, private firms and university researchers or something. And that would keep the spirit of broadening the research beyond just what the lab does.
For or from?
Including grants from?
Including grants for.
Yes.
Increase funding, including grants for, which is fine. You want to get grants, usually. Grants from. Is it?
No, you didn't give them grants.
Better hotel or you back to Clarion and.
Oh. Give me that pamphlet, you stay on campus.
You are dedicated.
And no, I'm staying on Whiskey Road.
Okay.
And that's yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice one.
Very nice.
Okay. So is that,
Okay, you guys.
So what we're thinking is that, we would go forward with the changes that we've made today with the assumption and assurance that on day one of the CAB meeting, we continue to, amend and add and delete. Yeah, everybody, how are we on time?
I think we have like 15 minutes until public comment.
Okay. And let's move on to another new recommendation. Do you have mine?
That's a SNF, a CERCLA.
Subject.
Time for disposition of SRS canisters.
So number 30.
Second one is not here.
So go to number 3.
I'm going to number 3. Okay, which is there's something about. Okay, it's titled Planning for Disposition of SRS Canisters and Elevator Materials. Afraid Pat, you're just gonna stay in the hot seat tonight because this is, we closed 313 and 314. So the purpose of this new recommendation, which will have a new number if it's voted on in CAB, is to move forward with some of our concerns that were we still had on those two recommendations. Under the discussion section, what started us on this is that Yucca Mountain, at the point at which we were talking about this, has now, Congress is now considering it again. So, given that, and
this meeting will end in 5 minutes.
All right then.
Right. And given the fact that WIP is now not able to receive waste, and that's the wrong word, but it's not able to receive transportation of things. We're back to what are we going to do for permanent storage, and what are we going to do for federal repository. Rose had a couple of concerns. One was that the final disposition obviously is one concern. But the other one, again, is, again, tooting the horn of SRS, and that our DWPS canisters are so unique and so useful. Going down to the last paragraph further, the SRS cab feels that DWPS canisters and elevated materials at SRS may be uniquely useful in determining the variable requirements for packaging, transporting, and storing this nuclear waste in a deep geologic repository. Such evaluations will be requisite to any repository receiving these used nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste materials. Before I say the recommendations, I want to say that help me out with this, DOE people, because we don't want a DOE response saying this is not in our purview. So help me with the language again so that they get the intent of what we're trying to say and can address it. So under the recommendations, and again, this is from Rose, some of her concerns. Given the issues described above, SRS recommends that, now if I got the right ones, DOE develop a plan for preliminary pilot testing of used nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste as a basis for establishing the variable handling, shipping, and storage requirements for permanently disposing of such materials in a deep geologic repository. Recommendation 2, DOE develop a plan to utilize SRS DWPF canisters and L-basin materials, both foreign and domestic, in the preliminary pilot test. And number 3, if DOE rejects above, that they provide a presentation to the SRS CAB explaining the scientific foundation for the rejection, which is explaining the foundation for the rejection. I'll open it up for DOE comments.
Okay, this is Pat McGuire, and I'm not sensing this is significantly different from the other recommendations you've written and have closed, because DOE basically says it's outside of your purview. Now, what I'm taking from this, and again, my own personal opinion, recommend to DOE whatever you want. Like thunder.
Yeah. Very good timing.
Thanks, Nina.
But we took out the word.
I understand. I know.
We took out the word and put it in 5 others.
I understand. So really where the department is that we had a Blue Ribbon Commission, made recommendations to the department, and the department issued a strategy. And understanding the community doesn't really like the strategy. It says we're going to have a pilot program by 2021 for spent fuel and high-level waste. We'll have a larger operating facility by 2025, and then we'll have a permanent repository by 2048. Okay? It sounds like you want to leapfrog that and start developing somewhere your own pilot facility using our materials. So that's kind of what we're saying. Well, the department's already, sanctioned a Blue Ribbon Committee. They made their recommendations, and DOE has a strategy. And part of that strategy is a pilot program, and it will, whatever community, state, some of these pilot long-term repository would be in, they would have their own siting criteria. They would have their own requirements of whatever it is. To do that today, next week, next year, or even have a plan, I don't even know where it would go. I don't know how it would be currently stored. So even though we have some very good materials, unique materials in our DWPF canisters and our spent fuel, I don't have anything to judge that against.
Thank you for calling.
Because this interim storage facility isn't even gonna be around or sited at least till 2021. So to ask DOE to leapfrog what the Blue Ribbon Commission asked to do and DOE issued our strategy, again, it's outside of our purview. That's managed by the Office of Nuclear Energy. So I understand your urgency to want to move on and make progress. However, what you're asking for, I think you may get a similar response. This is outside the purview, and that it's inconsistent with the strategy by already having an interim program by 2021. And we don't have anything to cite. What are we gonna test, preliminary and pilot testing of our fuel against, I don't know against what, because there isn't a pilot facility cited yet. So I am struggling with what to do with this.
And again, that's another committee member's,
Recommendation, yeah.
wish.
So
I'm not
again, you can
comfortable.
recommend whatever you want. You can send this as is, and I'll definitely support you. I'm just explaining my thoughts of where this may go and why I don't want to say, we rejected. We did not agree with your recommendation.
And Jenny, just next to DOE, just to help put a concept to what Pat's saying, if we went ahead and we designed for rail transport, you can put a whole lot more weight on a rail car than you can a truck. And if the facility that's chosen can only receive trucks, we've wasted all that money on that cask because it can't be used now. So there's a lot of assumptions that we would have defined in order for us to even make progress, or we just be redoing work.
No, we don't want that. Anybody else have comments? I had a question myself about number 3, and I know that the Blue Ribbon Committee is what we're referring to now. So in number 3, and I did write that part, when they say what they're going to say, I'm sure, I want to hear the progress that the Blue Ribbon Committee is making now. So would that be can that be addressed under number 3 so they give us some clue as to what's going on?
That'd be part of our work plan.
Again, work plan is a great thing. We had, who's the guy from Eddie?
Chris
Hansen. Chris Hansen came down probably a year ago or a little bit more and gave an update on the status of where the Office of Nuclear Energy is with regard, and I think at that time the department's response was just issued, and they talked about consent and things of that nature. And so that would be something you could just include in your work plan, that at some point in time ask Office of Nuclear Energy to give you an update on the status of the DOE strategy for high-level waste and spent nuclear fuel.
Let me switch. I just met with Pete Lyons, the head of the Office of Nuclear Energy, and the top person who's working on where DOE is going with spent fuel management, came in and had another meeting. I can give you her name, you can ask her down here, but I can tell you how much is happening, in my opinion.
No,
nothing is happening in Congress, in my opinion, but I forget her name right now. Anyway, she's came in because Moniz asked her to come in to take charge of the whole issue of community involvement and what happens next. She would be the person if you're looking for an update, in my opinion. I'm sure I can't remember her name, I don't have my notes.
Well, that could be someone for our quarterly admin outreach, where we bring in an outside speaker that might not fit. So you can just email her name and we can look at that.
I can send to you.
Okay, so we've had a couple of suggestions that some of these recommendations can be covered by presentations by 2 or 3 different people, and I've made notes on that. Are there any other ideas or suggestions on this one?
The only one I had is, under discussion, could we take out, it is the opinion of the SRS cap that, and just do, since the federal repository is now open, or there's now once again viable preliminary planning, just take out the word, it is the opinion of the CAB.
What page?
It's page 1. It's page 1 under discussion.
First paragraph under discussion.
Does the sentence still work? I'm so hesitant to use opinion of the cab, because that's how we got into that whole position paper situation.
That's good.
And then it's also on the I'm going to stop taking your comment. On the second page, it says further the SRS cab field. I think we could just do further DWPF and just take out cab field.
Madam Sealy, I don't know that as part of the recommendation, asking for a presentation.
Yeah, we would shift it.
If you're gonna shift and just
If we do, you know, at this point, I want to leave this as is, but I made some notes, because I'm substituting for Rose, and I'm going to discuss with her. One of the notes includes presentation and, Blue Ribbon Committee and some other things. Okay, I think I've got everything that y'all had suggested.
That's good.
Anything else? These are good changes. I feel like, you know, the old Southern joke about I can't walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. And not sit in the chair. Chairperson, you know, think and write and talk all at the same time.
It's nerve-wracking.
The audience is DOE and committee members. And that's all the work on recommendations for tonight. Anything other than that, let's move to public comment.
Fine.
Okay.
I have a question. For the second one, are you going to table it for now? Is that the plan?
No, I don't want to table it, because I want to keep the option open. If Rose wants to go to CAB, I want to do that, so.
Then you need to discuss it at committee level first.
Okay, so that's what this was the discussion at committee level.
We have to table it for now and then do it at our next committee meeting after the full board. So will that be August?
Yeah, that's what we're asking.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
We'll just delay discussion on it.
Yeah, so then our next committee one would be August.
Yeah.
So then we can talk about, is that the SNF, the CERCLA? So we'll talk about that in August to bring it to full board in September.
So which recommendations are going before the board in July? Just the first one?
First and the third. And the third.
Thank you. SRS support team keeps us procedurally straight. Anyone signed up for public comments?
There is no sign up, but if anybody's interested, at committee level, there's no sign up sheets.
Okay. Anybody have any comments? Tom? You talked out?
Don't let us down now, Tom.
Speaking of nuclear materials, I've raised this before, but I still would like to know from DOE, and I would encourage the CAB to ask what foreign commercial plutonium has come into Savannah Riverside. Because there has been some that's brought in, it has no disposition path. The GAO is looking into global threat reduction initiative, take back of highly enriched uranium and fissile materials, and I don't think they're necessarily getting into disposition, but I think it's something for you to ask. It may still be under NSA control, but this really doesn't have anything to do with your committee, but I just want to say it. I did meet with the Plutonium Disposition Working Group when I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and a bunch of people, and went through a lot of the disposition options and their recent report from April 29th. But I just want to say for the record, it was said clearly, and I've seen some erroneous statements in the media here that they're customers for the MOX program. Well, it was stated very clearly that nobody has approached DOE to provide reactors for MOX. The top of the Plutonium Disposition Working Group said that. So it was very interesting to, this is off the record, but to hear that no utilities have approached DOE, and I've seen otherwise around here, I don't know where the plutonium disposition program is going to go. It appeared to me that headquarters was really looking more strongly at the whip option before the accident, but it was mentioned several times about a hybrid option, which may be a mobilization of some of the plutonium in high-level waste here without making the pucks and taking it to whip, and I think they're feeling that whip is going to reopen. But this may end up back on your table if the whole MOX program continues on the track it is, which is funding-wise totally unsustainable. But I just wanted mainly to mention that DOE headquarters said there are no MOX customers to approach them. And if anybody, again, mentions around here that there are customers, I want to hear who they are. I've seen it several times, and nobody's ever put forth that there are customers. But it's not your bailiwick, but that's something I'll certainly keep an eye on. Thank you.
Yes, Jenny. Marilyn Parson, Cap. I just wanted to suggest there is a public meeting on this highly enriched uranium from Germany, and I'm hoping that people from this committee and other CAB members will attend that on Tuesday, June 24th at 6:30.
I think I'm planning.
At the Augusta Community Center.
I'm planning to go too. I think, is that the one I'm going to? Okay.
And I think after that we should consider, the time turnaround very quick though, that we should consider probably submitting a letter, comments to Department of Energy on this issue if we feel after the meeting that it's appropriate to do so. So,
I'll take.
I don't know who else will go. I think I'm gonna try to stay and go because we have the committee meet on the 23rd, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, which is a Monday, and then the next evening. So I think I may try to stay and go to that.
And it's a very important public meeting coming up, and I do encourage everybody to go. Any other comments? Yeah.
And just, Pat McGuire with DOE, along with that, just, again, encourage you to attend without a doubt. With regard to, generally, if you're making a public comment, you don't want to say this is on behalf of the CAB because you did not deliberate what your comment is. Okay, so just as a reminder, you can say you're affiliated with the CAB, but this is my comment as a public citizen. Just want to make sure if you do decide to make that comment because you didn't vote on something.
Well, I was talking about writing a letter during the comment period, not public, not.
And if you write a letter during the period, you need to discuss it in the CAB before. Okay, yeah. You can always write public comments as a public citizen, as a person. Yes, I just want to make sure that clarification there. So we've had some problems in the past.
Yes, but no, we don't want to do that again. That was
yes, it was not good. So just as a reminder, we have some new people, and I just want to make sure it's above board.
And the department's looking at trying to make that available online, similar to your Google Hangout. So if that becomes available, there'll be newspaper articles telling you how to do that.
Oh, what newspapers?
Local area.
Oh yeah,
so come up and buy a newspaper.
Make sure that the CAB gets.
Okay.
I'm going to be out of town at that time. I really want to listen in on that. Can you send that out on the normal?
Email list?
Yeah, the email list, like how to get online for that.
That'd be great. Is that something?
We're working on it. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition, but that is our goal to try and have it.
Are there 2 dates for the public meeting, or is it just this one?
It's one, the 23rd at 6:30.
June 24th.
6:30.
I can hear it.
Where it is at the community center?
24th, sorry.
Yeah.
24th.
Our meeting?
24th.
The committee meeting is 23rd.
Committee meets the 23rd.
Monday.
Yes, Monday the 23rd.
That's just right down the street. I'll be.
So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I'm glad you know that now.
There's something about
Sign your comment
Jenny, you did wonderful.
Comment sheet also. See, I did it.